Welcome back, my friend. Before we start the video, I really need your support. The channel is going through a tough time, and your help means everything. Let's try to reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments. If everyone watching leaves just one like and one comment, we can easily make it happen. Don't forget to subscribe as well. And now, let's get started. My name is Ezra, and I've been a ranger at the Superior National Forest in northeastern Minnesota for 11 years. I'm writing this account because what I've witnessed in these woods has convinced me that we share this wilderness with things that shouldn't exist, things that have been here far longer than we have. It started in late October 2019, during the tail end of hunting season. The aspens had already dropped their leaves, and the forest floor was carpeted in gold and rust. I was patrolling the remote northwestern section near the Canadian border, an area so thick with jack pine and black spruce that even in daylight the canopy creates perpetual twilight. I'd received a call on my radio from dispatch. Around 3 p.m., a hunter had reported finding a deer carcass that didn't look right. The coordinates placed it about 2 miles off the nearest logging road, accessible only by foot or ATV. I took my four-wheeler, following an overgrown trail that hadn't seen maintenance in years. The temperature was dropping fast. It couldn't have been more than 35 degrees, and a cold front was pushing down from Canada. The wind had that particular bite that comes before the first real snow. I remember thinking I'd need to make this quick if I wanted to get back before dark. I found the hunter waiting at the trailhead, a local guy named Carl Henderson, who'd been hunting these woods for 40 years. Carl was pale, and his hands shook as he pointed me toward the site. He wouldn't go back with me, said he'd seen enough. It's about a quarter mile in due east, he told me, his voice tight. You'll smell it before you see it. He was right. The stench hit me when I was still 50 yards away, that sickly sweet rot of death, but mixed with something else, something musky and wrong. I've smelled plenty of dead animals in my career. This was different. The deer was a 6-point buck, probably 200 pounds in life. What was left of it hung about 7 feet off the ground, draped over a thick pine branch. The entire rib cage had been ripped open, and the spine was clearly visible. But what made my stomach turn wasn't the violence of the kill, it was the precision. The deer had been systematically opened, the organs removed cleanly, almost surgically. The heart, liver, and lungs were gone. The intestines lay in a neat pile at the base of the tree. I'd seen bear kills before. I'd seen wolf kills. This was neither. The bark on the tree showed deep gouges, 4 parallel marks that ran vertically up the trunk. I measured them with my utility knife. They were approximately 12 feet up the tree, and each groove was roughly 2 inches apart. The depth suggested incredible force. Whatever had done this was strong enough to climb while carrying a full-grown deer. I took photographs, collected samples of the hair I found snagged on the lower branches. It was coarse, dark gray, about 3 inches long. Not deer hair, not bear either. The texture was wrong, more like dog hair but thicker, almost wire-like. The ground around the tree was disturbed. The forest floor in that area was mostly pine needles over sandy soil, and I found tracks. Large tracks. Canine in shape, 4 toe pads, and a palm pad. But the size was all wrong. Each print measured approximately 6 inches wide and 8 inches long. The stride length was enormous, close to 5 feet between prints. Whatever had made these tracks was walking on 2 legs, not 4. I know what you're thinking. Dog prints, maybe a large wolf, but wolves don't walk upright, and these prints showed only 2 feet, not 4. The gait pattern was bipedal. I followed the tracks for about 200 yards before they disappeared into a rocky area where the ground was too hard to leave prints. The trail led northwest, deeper into the forest toward a section of wilderness that doesn't see visitors more than once or twice a year. I radioed in my findings, careful to keep my language clinical. Possible large predator, species unknown. Recommend closing this section until we can investigate further. Dispatch asked if I wanted backup. I said yes. By the time I got back to my truck, the sun was setting, and the temperature had dropped below freezing. Carl's truck was gone. I didn't blame him. That night, lying in my cabin at the ranger station, I couldn't stop thinking about those tracks. I've got a degree in wildlife biology. I know the fauna of this region, inside and out. Black bears, timber wolves, coyotes, lynx, bobcats, even the occasional moose or elk. Nothing, absolutely nothing in the Superior National Forest walks on 2 legs and leaves tracks like that. I pulled up the photos on my laptop, zooming in on the images. The more I looked at them, the more disturbed I became. The claw marks on the tree were too deliberate, too controlled, and there was something else I'd noticed at the scene but hadn't fully registered until now. The deer's head was missing, not torn off in a frenzy, but removed cleanly, separated at the atlas vertebra, with what appeared to be incredible precision. Around midnight, I heard something outside. The ranger station is remote. The nearest town is 40 miles away, and the nearest neighbor is a seasonal hunting cabin, about 6 miles down the road. At night, it's absolutely silent, except for the occasional owl or the wind in the pines. This sound was different. It started as a low vocalization, almost like a howl, but deeper, more resonant. It had harmonics I'd never heard in any animal call. The sound seemed to vibrate in my chest. Then it changed, becoming a series of shorter barks, aggressive and territorial. I went to the window, but the security light outside only illuminated about 30 feet of the clearing around the cabin. Beyond that was absolute darkness. The sound came again, closer this time, from the tree line maybe 50 yards out. I grabbed my spotlight and my rifle, a Remington 80-70. I keep for bear encounters, and stepped onto the porch. The temperature had dropped to the low 20s, and my breath came out in thick clouds. I swept the spotlight across the trees. For just a moment, I caught a reflection. 2 eyes, maybe 7 feet off the ground, glowing amber green in the light. They were too far apart to be a wolf or coyote, too high to be a bear standing on all fours. The eyes stared at me for perhaps 3 seconds, then disappeared. I stood there for 10 minutes, sweeping the light back and forth, but I didn't see anything else. Whatever it was had gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen with the rifle across my lap and every light in the cabin on, listening to the sounds of the forest. Around 4 a.m., I heard something large moving through the brush behind the cabin. Heavy footfalls, deliberate and slow, then silence. When dawn finally came, I went outside to check the perimeter. In the soft earth behind the cabin, I found more tracks. The same tracks. They came within 20 feet of my back door, then circled around the cabin before heading back into the forest. Whatever had killed that deer had followed me home. Over the next week, I returned to the site with a team from the state DNR. We set up trail cameras in a grid pattern covering about 2 square miles. We collected more hair samples, took plaster casts of the tracks, and documented everything we could find. The DNR biologist, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, was baffled by the evidence. The hair samples didn't match anything in their database. The tracks were consistent across multiple locations, always showing the same bipedal gait pattern, always the same size and shape. Could be someone hoaxing, she said, but she didn't sound convinced. But the hair's real. Some kind of canid, definitely. The follicle structure is similar to wolf or large dog, but the pigmentation is off. We found 3 more kill sites over the next 5 days, all deer, all mutilated in the same way, hung in trees, rib cage opened, specific organs removed, head missing. The pattern was consistent, almost ritualistic. On day 6, one of our trail cameras captured something. The footage was time-stamped at 2:47 a.m. The camera was positioned along a game trail about a mile from where we'd found the first deer. For the first 30 seconds, there's nothing but an empty trail, faint starlight filtering through the canopy. Then it appears. The figure enters from the left side of the frame, moving with a fluid, purposeful gait. It's massive. I'd estimate 7 to 8 feet tall, heavily built through the shoulders and chest. The body is covered in dark fur, grayish-brown in the infrared light. The head is distinctly canine, a long snout, pointed ears that swivel independently, tracking sounds we can't hear. But it's walking upright, not hunched over like a bear, but fully bipedal, with a stride that suggests this is its natural form of locomotion. The arms are long, hanging past where human arms would end, and I can see the hands or paws have elongated fingers or digits. It stops in the middle of the frame, turns its head directly toward the camera. For 5 seconds, it stares straight into the lens. Then it opens its mouth, and even though the camera doesn't record sound, I can see the teeth, long, pointed canines that catch the infrared light. It drops to all fours and charges. The camera shakes as the creature tears it from the tree. The last frame shows a close-up of fur and teeth before the feed goes black. When we retrieved the camera the next day, we found it 30 feet from the tree, smashed and partially buried under a pile of leaves and branches. The creature had deliberately destroyed it and tried to hide the evidence. Dr. Chen went pale when we reviewed the footage back at the station. "This isn't possible," she kept saying. "This can't be real." But it was real. We had it on video. We had the tracks, the hair, the kill sites. Whatever this thing was, it was hunting in the Superior National Forest, and it knew we were looking for it. The DNR wanted to keep it quiet. No press releases, no public warnings. They were afraid of panic, afraid of vigilantes flooding into the forest with guns. They ordered us to remove the trail cameras and suspended all further investigation. But I couldn't let it go. I'd seen the footage. I'd heard that howl outside my cabin. I knew what was out there. I started doing research, digging through old reports and local folklore. That's when I found the term dogman, stories going back more than a century scattered across the northern United States and Canada. Witnesses describing large bipedal canines, creatures that walked like men but had the heads and bodies of wolves or dogs. Most people dismissed it as myth, as misidentification or hoaxes, but I'd seen the evidence. I knew better. The official report listed the incidents as bear activity, and the footage as equipment malfunction. The case was closed. But the killings didn't stop. It was January 2021, and I'd been transferred to the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington State. The transfer wasn't voluntary. The DNR wanted me out of Minnesota after I'd continued investigating the dogman sightings against their orders. They couldn't fire me without cause, so they buried me in the Pacific Northwest, as far from Superior as they could send me. Gifford-Pinchot is different from the Minnesota forests. The trees are massive here, Douglas fir, western hemlock, and western red cedar that have been growing for centuries. The understory is thick with ferns and devil's club, and the constant rain keeps everything perpetually damp. The forest floor is covered in moss that muffles sound, making the woods feel both alive and unnaturally quiet. I was assigned to the southern section near Mount Adams, a remote area that sees maybe a few dozen visitors a year. The terrain is brutal, steep volcanic slopes, dense old-growth forest, and miles of wilderness without trails or roads. It's the kind of place where you could disappear and no one would find you for months, if ever. I'd been on the job for 3 weeks when I got the call. A group of hikers had reported finding enormous footprints near the Green River, about 8 miles into the backcountry. The dispatcher sounded skeptical. We get Bigfoot reports constantly in the Pacific Northwest, but protocol required investigation. I hiked in alone, following the Green River Trail until it petered out into game paths and thick undergrowth. The hikers had marked the GPS coordinates leading me to a clearing near a creek bed where the ground was soft mud and river silt. The prints were unmistakable. They were massive. Each one measured approximately 16 inches long and 7 inches wide at the ball of the foot. Human-shaped, 5 toes, a pronounced arch, a distinct heel. But the size put them far beyond any human. The stride length between prints was close to 6 feet, suggesting something well over 8 feet tall. There were dozens of prints, creating a clear trail that paralleled the creek heading upstream into the deep forest. Some prints were perfect impressions, showing dermal ridges, the equivalent of fingerprints in the mud. The level of detail was extraordinary. You could see the flecks of the toes, the distribution of weight, even what appeared to be hair impressions around the edges. I took measurements, photographs, and made plaster casts of the clearest prints. The depth of the impressions suggested enormous weight, easily 600 to 800 pounds. Whatever had made these tracks was built like nothing else on this continent. Following the trail, I noticed other signs. Trees had been broken at heights of 8 to 10 feet, snapped cleanly as if something very tall had walked through and pushed them aside. Large rocks had been moved, some weighing 50 pounds or more, stacked deliberately next to the creek. There were what appeared to be beds, circular depressions about 5 feet across in areas where the ferns had been flattened, and arranged almost like nests. I radioed in my findings. Unlike Minnesota, Washington State has a different attitude toward these reports. They don't officially acknowledge Bigfoot, but they don't actively suppress investigation either. I was told to document everything and report back. The trail led deeper into the forest, climbing up the slopes of Mount Adams. The terrain became increasingly difficult. Steep inclines, deadfall blocking the path, sections where I had to use my hands to climb. The tracks continued, showing no difficulty with the terrain whatsoever. Around mid-afternoon, I reached a ridge about 3,000 feet above the valley floor. The view was spectacular, endless forest stretching in every direction, Mount Adams rising above it all, its peak still covered in snow despite the season. That's when I smelled it. The odor was overwhelming, a combination of wet dog, rotting meat, and something else, something sour and organic I couldn't identify. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I'd read about this in reports, witnesses consistently describing an intense smell associated with Bigfoot encounters. I drew my bear spray and my radio, keying the mic. Dispatch, I'm at the ridge coordinates I sent earlier. There's... A sound cut me off. From somewhere above me, deeper in the forest, came a vocalization unlike anything I'd ever heard. It started as a low rumbling moan, almost subsonic, vibrating in my chest. Then it rose in pitch, becoming a high-pitched scream that echoed off the mountains. The sound lasted maybe 5 seconds, then cut off abruptly. Every bird in the forest went silent. The wind seemed to stop. I stood frozen, my finger still on the radio mic, listening. For a full minute, there was no sound at all except my own breathing. Then I heard movement. Heavy footfalls, deliberate and slow, moving through the forest above my position. Something big was coming down the slope toward me. I didn't run. Running triggers chase instincts and predators. Instead, I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the forest upslope, the bear spray ready in my hand. The footfalls stopped. Silence again. Then I saw it. About 60 yards upslope, partially obscured by a massive Douglas fir, something stood watching me. I could make out the shape, tall, at least 8 feet, covered in dark reddish-brown hair. The shoulders were enormous, the chest barrel-like. I couldn't see the face clearly through the branches, but I could see the eyes. They were watching me with unmistakable intelligence. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then it did something that sent ice through my veins. It reached out with one massive arm. I could see the hand, human-like but much larger, and grabbed a tree trunk. The tree was maybe 8 inches in diameter. The creature shook it violently, making the entire tree sway. It was a display, a warning. The message was clear. I'm bigger than you, stronger than you. This is my territory. I took the hint. Still moving slowly, I backed away down the trail, keeping my eyes on the spot where the creature stood. After about 50 yards, I turned and walked quickly back the way I'd come, fighting the urge to run. I didn't look back until I'd descended about 1,000 feet. When I finally did turn around, I saw nothing but forest. But I had the distinct impression I was still being watched, that something was following me, making sure I left. I made it back to my truck around dusk. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. That night, I called a friend from my wildlife biology program at university, a primatologist named Dr. James Richardson, who'd done field work studying mountain gorillas in Africa. I described what I'd seen, careful to keep my voice level and clinical. "You're describing behaviors consistent with a large ape," he said. "The tree shaking is a dominance display. Gorillas do exactly the same thing. The nest building, the rock stacking, even the smell. Gorillas have a very distinct odor. But Ezra, there are no large apes in North America, nothing even close." "I know what I saw, James. I'm not saying you didn't see something. I'm saying what you're describing shouldn't exist." Over the next 2 months, I returned to the area repeatedly. I never saw the creature again, but I found more evidence. Tracks, always the same size and shape, more twisted trees, broken branches, fresh nests, and once, on a tree about 9 feet up, I found a tuft of hair, coarse, reddish-brown, about 4 inches long. I sent the hair to a private lab for analysis without telling them where it came from. The results came back inconclusive. Primate hair. Species unknown. Closest genetic match. Homo sapiens, but significant variance in structure and pigmentation. Contamination suspected. They thought it was human hair that had been contaminated or degraded. But I knew better. The lab tech even noted in his report, "Sample shows unusual characteristics not consistent with any known primate species." I started researching historical accounts. The reports go back centuries. Native American tribes throughout the Pacific Northwest have stories of the Sasquatch, a giant hairy creature that lives in the deepest forests. White settlers reported sightings as early as the 1840s. Hundreds of footprint finds, thousands of reported sightings, dozens of photographs and videos. The Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967 is the most famous 16mm footage of a large bipedal creature walking across a sandbar in Northern California. Experts have analyzed it for decades. No one has ever proven it was a hoax, and the subject's anatomical proportions and locomotion are consistent with a real biological entity, not a human in a suit. In April 2021, I had my second encounter. I was patrolling a logging road near the Mosquito Lakes when I found fresh tracks crossing the muddy road. It had rained heavily the night before, and the tracks were perfect impressions. They led into the forest on the south side, heading toward a steep ravine. I followed them, marking the trail with GPS waypoints. The tracks led down into the ravine across a small creek, then up the other side. The creature had traveled maybe 2 miles, moving in a straight line towards something specific. That's when I found the elk. It was a bull, probably 700 pounds, lying in a clearing at the bottom of the ravine. The elk was freshly killed. I could tell because the blood was still bright red, not oxidized yet. The cause of death was obvious. The neck was broken, not torn or bitten, but snapped cleanly, the way you'd wring a chicken's neck, except this was a 700-pound elk. The massive strength required to do that was almost incomprehensible. A full-grown elk can fight off a pack of wolves. A grizzly bear would maul and bite it to death. But this elk had been killed with a single powerful twist of its neck. I heard movement behind me and spun around. Standing at the edge of the clearing, not 30 feet away, was the creature. In full daylight, the details were unmistakable. It stood at least 8 feet tall, possibly closer to 9. The body was covered in long, dark, reddish-brown hair, except for the face, palms, and chest, where the skin was visible, leathery and dark, almost black. The face was somewhere between human and ape, with a pronounced brow ridge, a flat nose, and a strong jaw. The eyes were dark, and they were looking directly at me with clear, focused intelligence. The shoulders and arms were massively muscled. The hands hung past its knees, and I could see the fingers, long, thick, ending in what looked like human fingernails but larger. The legs were proportionally shorter than a human's, powerfully built. We stood there, the creature and I, 30 feet apart with a dead elk between us. Neither of us moved. Then, very deliberately, the creature bent down and grabbed the elk by one of its hind legs. The massive body lifted the 700-pound animal like I would lift a bag of groceries. The creature slung the elk over its shoulder, turned, and walked away into the forest, disappearing into the undergrowth without making a sound. I stood frozen for a full minute after it left, my heart hammering in my chest. The creature could have killed me easily. I'd seen what it did to the elk, but it hadn't shown any aggression. It had simply retrieved its kill and left, making it clear that this was its territory and its food. I reported the incident that evening. The response was predictable. Skepticism mixed with bureaucratic reluctance to deal with something that didn't fit into neat categories. They filed my report and told me to stop pursuing these encounters. But I couldn't stop. I'd seen it twice now, in broad daylight. I had photographs of tracks, hair samples, documentation of kills. I knew what was out there. Whatever Bigfoot is, an undiscovered primate, a surviving member of Gigantopithecus, something else entirely. It's real. It lives in these forests. And it's been here long before we arrived. By November 2022, I'd been transferred again, this time to the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd sent me back to Minnesota, though to a different forest. The BWCAW is one of the most remote wilderness areas in the continental United States, over 1 million acres of pristine forest and lakes along the Canadian border. I was assigned to the ranger station at Sawbill Lake, a lonely outpost that's only accessible by a single gravel road. During winter, I was often the only person within a 50-mile radius. The isolation was profound. No cell service, limited radio contact, just me and the forest. The first snow came early that year, in mid-October. By November, we had 2 feet on the ground and temperatures dropping below zero at night. The lakes were starting to freeze, and the forest took on that particular silence that comes with deep cold. No birds, no insects, just the occasional creak of ice or the wind through bare branches. I was doing a routine patrol on snowshoes when I found the first sight. The tracks were immediately wrong. They were in the snow heading northeast along the shoreline of Sawbill Lake, humanoid but elongated, each footprint measuring about 14 inches long and unusually narrow, maybe 5 inches wide. The toes were distinctly separated, splayed outward, but what disturbed me most was the stride length, over 7 feet between prints. Whatever had made these tracks was moving fast, in long, loping strides that suggested incredible leg strength. And the tracks were fresh, no more than a few hours old based on the lack of snowdrift in the impressions. I followed them for about 2 miles. The trail led away from the lake into dense forest, through terrain so thick with deadfall and undergrowth that I had to remove my snowshoes and crawl under fallen logs in places. That's when I found the camp. It had been a small campsite, probably 2 people based on the tent size. The tent was still there, but it had been shredded, not cut or torn by a knife, but ripped apart by incredible force. The poles were bent and twisted. The gear was scattered across a 20-foot radius, sleeping bags torn open with insulation spread across the snow like down feathers, a backpack ripped in half, food containers crushed. But what made my blood run cold was the blood. There was so much blood. Arterial spray patterns on the snow, on the trees, frozen in dark red splashes across the white landscape. Drag marks led away from the campsite, parallel grooves in the snow where something heavy had been pulled. I radioed immediately for backup, though I knew it would take hours for anyone to reach me. Then I followed the drag marks. They led about 400 yards into the forest to a rocky outcropping. At the base of the rocks, I found what remained of the campers. I've seen death before. I've seen what bears can do to humans, what wolves can do to deer. This was different. This was calculated violence. Both bodies had been partially consumed. The flesh had been stripped from the arms and legs with what appeared to be teeth marks, human-like dentition, but larger, deeper. The rib cages were cracked open, the organs gone. But what disturbed me most was the condition of the bones. They'd been broken open, and the marrow had been scraped out. The heads were missing, both of them. I found tracks all around the site, the same elongated, splayed footprints, but also other signs. Handprints in the snow near the bodies, impossibly long fingers, each print measuring about 10 inches from palm to fingertip. And there was hair, coarse, grayish-white, about 3 inches long, scattered around the area. I secured the scene as best I could and waited for backup. It took 6 hours. By the time the county sheriff and a team from the state police arrived, it was dark and the temperature had dropped to 15 below zero. The official investigation took 3 days. The victims were identified as 2 college students from the University of Minnesota. Both experienced winter campers. They'd gotten a backcountry permit for a week-long trip through the Boundary Waters. The medical examiner's initial report stated the cause of death as massive trauma consistent with large animal attack. But privately, the ME told me something different. The bite patterns are wrong, he said. They're not bear, not wolf. The dentition suggests a large primate or human, but the size is all wrong. And the consumption pattern, the preference for organs, the marrow extraction, that's not typical predation behavior, that's starvation behavior. What do you mean, I asked. I mean whatever killed these people was hungry. Not just killing for territory or defense, but killing to eat. This was a feeding. The investigation was closed within 2 weeks. The official report listed it as a bear attack, despite the evidence clearly indicating otherwise. The families were told their children were killed by a black bear, and the area was temporarily closed to campers. But I knew what had done this. I'd researched enough by then to recognize the signs. Wendigo. The name comes from Algonquian folklore, spread across the northern regions of the United States and Canada. The Wendigo is described as a malevolent spirit or creature associated with winter, famine, and cannibalism. According to the legends, it's a gaunt, skeletal figure with ash-gray skin, sunken eyes, and an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Some stories say it was once human, transformed by starvation and cannibalism into something else, something that can never be satisfied no matter how much it consumes. I dismissed it as folklore, as cultural mythology meant to discourage cannibalism during harsh winters. But now, looking at the evidence, I wasn't so sure. Over the next month, I found 3 more kill sites, all within a 20-mile radius of Sawbill Lake. All followed the same pattern. Campers or hikers attacked at their campsites, partially consumed, heads removed. The tracks were always the same, those elongated, splayed footprints measuring 14 inches long. I started documenting everything, building a case file with photographs, track casts, and hair samples. I sent the hair to 3 different labs under false pretenses. All 3 came back with variations of the same result. Unknown primate. Genetic markers suggest extreme metabolic stress and possible mutations consistent with starvation conditions. The winter of 2022-2023 was brutal. Record cold, record snowfall. The Boundary Waters was effectively cut off from December through March. I stayed at the Sawbill station alone, maintaining the buildings and monitoring the wilderness. That's when the creature came to me. It was January. Deep winter. The temperature had been below zero for 3 weeks straight. I was in the station around midnight when I heard something outside, a scraping sound against the exterior wall of the cabin. I grabbed my rifle and spotlight, moving to the window. The security lights illuminated maybe 30 feet of clearing around the station. Beyond that was darkness. The scraping came again, closer to the door this time. Then I heard breathing, deep, labored breaths that sounded almost human but wrong, as if the lungs were damaged or diseased. I turned on the spotlight and pointed it through the window. The creature stood at the edge of the light, maybe 20 feet from the cabin. It was emaciated, skeletal. The skin was grayish-white, pulled tight over prominent bones. The rib cage was clearly visible, each rib defined under the skin. The arms were impossibly long and thin, the fingers extending like spider legs tipped with yellowed nails that curved into claws. The legs were bent wrong, as if the joints didn't work quite right, giving it a hunched, predatory stance. But the face. God. The face was the worst part. It had been human once, maybe. The skull structure was human, but sunken and distorted. The eye sockets were deep and dark, but I could see the eyes inside, yellowed and bloodshot, staring at me with desperate hunger. The mouth was open, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp, stained dark with old blood. The lips had receded or been torn away, giving it a permanent rictus grin. The creature's breath came out in visible clouds in the cold air. It stank, even through the closed window I could smell it, a combination of rot and decay and something acidic. It stared at me for a long moment, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then it opened its mouth wider and made a sound, a long, keening wail that was almost a scream, filled with rage and hunger and something that might have been anguish. I raised the rifle, aiming through the window. The creature saw the movement and flinched back, retreating into the darkness beyond the light. But it didn't leave. For the rest of the night, I could hear it circling the cabin, scraping at the walls, testing the doors and windows, looking for a way in. I stayed awake until dawn with the rifle in my hands. When the sun finally came up, I went outside to check the perimeter. The tracks were everywhere, dozens of them, circling the cabin multiple times. In the snow near the door, I found deep gouges where the creature had tried to dig or claw its way through the wood. And on the window where I'd stood with the rifle, there was a handprint in the frost, the same impossibly long fingers pressed against the glass from the outside. I took photographs of everything. I measured the tracks, collected hair samples from where the creature had brushed against the cabin wall. The evidence was irrefutable. I filed a report that morning detailing the encounter and requesting immediate assistance. The response came back within hours. I was being removed from my position, effective immediately. The report was classified as psychological distress due to isolation, and I was ordered to undergo mandatory psychiatric evaluation. They drove me out that afternoon. As we left the Sawbill station, I looked back at the forest. In the trees about 100 yards from the cabin, I saw it, the creature standing motionless among the pines, watching me leave. The psychiatric evaluation found me fit for duty but recommended I take extended leave. I refused. I knew what I'd seen and I knew what was out there. The Wendigo is real. It hunts in the northern forests during the deepest cold of winter. It was human once, perhaps, or something like human. But starvation and isolation and something else, some fundamental corruption, transformed it into what it is now, a creature of endless hunger that can never be satisfied. The boundary waters remain closed in winter. The official reason is dangerous wildlife activity. They don't specify what kind of wildlife. But I know. And now you know too. March 2024 brought me to the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest in northern Wisconsin, my fourth assignment in 5 years. The pattern was clear. The Forest Service kept moving me to remote stations, burying me in paperwork and routine patrols, hoping I'd quit or stay quiet about what I'd seen. The Chequamegon-Nicolet is strange territory, a patchwork of deep forest, boggy lowlands, and abandoned logging country. It straddles the transition zone between the northern boreal forests and the deciduous forests to the south, creating an ecological edge where different ecosystems meet. Edge habitats are always the most active, the most dangerous. Predators hunt edges. I'd been there 2 weeks when I started noticing the patterns. The reports came in scattered across my first month. Hikers seeing large shapes moving through the forest, finding tracks they couldn't identify, hearing vocalizations that didn't match any known animal. Separately, each report seemed like the usual background noise of a wilderness area, people unfamiliar with the forest misidentifying common animals or letting their imaginations run wild. But taken together, the reports formed a pattern. They clustered around a specific area, the headwaters region of the Popple River, a remote section of the forest accessible only by a network of old logging roads. The timeline showed the sightings were increasing, happening more frequently as winter ended and spring began. I pulled the historical data and found something disturbing. Every spring for the past 15 years there had been a spike in unusual activity in the Popple River area. Missing campers, unexplained deaths attributed to accidents or animal attacks, hikers reporting encounters with unknown creatures. The pattern repeated with clockwork regularity. I started investigating, making the 3-hour drive from my station to the Popple River headwaters several times a week. The area was exactly what I expected: dense mixed forest, thick understory, poor sightlines, perfect cover for large predators. On my third visit, I found the first evidence. Tracks in the mud along the riverbank, canine prints, approximately 6 inches wide, showing the distinct pattern of bipedal locomotion, dogman. The tracks were fresh, probably less than 12 hours old. 200 yards upstream I found different tracks, massive human-like footprints, 16 inches long, with a stride length suggesting something over 8 feet tall. Bigfoot. These were even fresher, maybe 6 hours old. And then, a half-mile further into the forest, I found the third set, elongated, splayed footprints measuring 14 inches, the toes spread wide. Wendigo. These tracks were the freshest of all, probably made within the last few hours. All 3 sets of tracks were converging on the same location, following the river upstream toward its source. I radioed in my position and findings, requesting backup. The response was predictable. Document and monitor, do not engage. Standard protocol when dealing with potential large predator activity. I followed the tracks. I know I shouldn't have. Protocol says wait for backup, don't go alone into unknown situations. But I'd been hunting these things for 5 years. I needed to know what was happening, why all 3 species were converging on the same location. The tracks led me deep into the forest, following the river for almost 4 miles. The terrain became increasingly difficult. Steep ravines, deadfall, thick undergrowth. Several times I lost the trail and had to backtrack, searching for signs. Finally, around mid-afternoon, I reached the source of the Popple River, a large natural spring that formed a pool maybe 40 feet across. The water was crystal clear, fed by underground aquifers, and even in early spring, it was flowing steadily. The area around the spring was trampled, the ground torn up by heavy traffic, All three sets of tracks were everywhere, overlapping and intermingling. Fresh scat indicated the creatures had been here recently. Some of it was still steaming in the cool air. And then I found the kills. Scattered around the spring were carcasses, deer mostly, but also smaller animals. Raccoons, porcupines, even what looked like a black bear, all had been killed in the distinct styles I'd documented before. The deer hung in trees with their organs removed. Dogman, the bear's neck snapped cleanly. Bigfoot, smaller animals partially consumed with the bones broken open for marrow. Wendigo. This was a feeding ground, a territory marker, a convergence point. I was setting up my camera to document the scene when I heard the first vocalization. From the forest to my north came a long howling bark, aggressive and territorial. Dogman. The sound was close, maybe 200 yards. Before the echo faded, a second call answered from the west. A deep resonant moan that rose into a high-pitched scream. Bigfoot. Also close, maybe 150 yards. And then from directly behind me came a keening wail that raised every hair on my body. Wendigo. Very close. Maybe 50 yards. I was surrounded. I drew my rifle and my bear spray, backing toward the largest tree I could find, a massive old-growth hemlock with low branches I could potentially climb if needed. My heart was hammering and my hands were shaking, but my training kept me focused. Stay calm, don't run, make yourself large, prepare to fight if necessary. The dogman appeared first, emerging from the forest to my north. In daylight I could see details I'd missed in the trail camera footage from Minnesota. The gray-brown fur was matted and scarred, the ears were torn and ragged, and the snout showed old injuries. This was an old male, experienced and dangerous. It stood fully upright, maybe 7.5 feet tall, watching me with amber eyes that showed clear intelligence. The Bigfoot came next, from the west. This was the largest I'd seen, easily 9 feet tall, powerfully built, covered in reddish-brown hair. It walked on 2 legs but hunched forward slightly, its long arms swinging. When it saw me, it stopped at the edge of the clearing and grabbed a dead branch from a fallen tree. With casual strength, it broke the branch, maybe 3 inches in diameter like a twig, then tossed the pieces aside. A warning. The Wendigo was last. It emerged from the trees behind me, moving with a hunched, predatory gait. The creature was even more emaciated than the one I'd seen in Minnesota. The skin pulled so tight I could see every bone, every sinew. The eyes were wild, frantic with hunger. It stared at me and opened its mouth, revealing those terrible teeth, and began to advance. The Bigfoot reacted immediately. It charged forward, not at me, but at the Wendigo, moving with shocking speed for something so large. It roared, a deep, bellowing sound that shook the air, and the Wendigo flinched back, retreating into the tree line. The dogman responded to the Bigfoot's charge by dropping to all fours and snarling, showing its teeth. The two creatures faced each other across the clearing, both clearly agitated, both showing aggression. And I realized what I was witnessing. Territorial dispute. This spring was important to all 3 species for some reason. Water source, hunting ground, some other resource I didn't understand, and they were fighting over it. The Wendigo, driven by its insatiable hunger, tried again to enter the clearing, targeting me as the easiest prey. The Bigfoot intercepted it again, grabbing a fallen log, it must have weighed 200 pounds, and throwing it at the Wendigo. The log hit the ground near the creature, and the Wendigo shrieked and retreated deeper into the forest. The dogman watched this exchange, then turned its attention back to me. We locked eyes. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, very deliberately, the dogman turned and walked away into the forest, disappearing into the undergrowth. The Bigfoot remained, standing at the edge of the clearing. It looked at me, then at the spring, then back at me. The message was clear: leave. This isn't your territory. I left. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the Bigfoot until I was a safe distance from the spring. Then I turned and walked quickly back the way I'd come, following my GPS back to the logging road where I'd left my truck. I didn't run, I didn't look back, but I could feel them watching me leave, ensuring I understood the boundaries. That night, I compiled my report and documentation. I had photographs of the tracks, the kill sites, the trampled ground around the spring. I had GPS coordinates, measurements, hair samples. I had witnessed all 3 species in the same location, interacting with each other, establishing territorial boundaries. The Forest Service response was swift and final. I was suspended pending investigation. My documentation was classified. I was ordered not to discuss my findings with anyone outside the agency. But I knew what I'd seen. These creatures, dogmen, Bigfoot, Wendigo, they're not separate mysteries, they're competing predators sharing the same ecosystem. They hunt the same territories, use the same resources, follow the same seasonal patterns, and they're aware of each other with established hierarchies and territorial boundaries. The Bigfoot is the apex predator, largest, strongest, dominant. The dogman is the aggressive territorial hunter, more predatory, more dangerous to humans. And the Wendigo is the desperate scavenger, driven by endless hunger, taking whatever it can get. They've been here longer than us. They've learned to avoid us, to stay hidden, to operate in the deepest wilderness where humans rarely go. But they're here, they're real, and they're closer than anyone wants to admit. It's November 2024, and I'm no longer a park ranger. I was forced to resign 6 months ago after my suspension became a termination. The official reason was failure to follow protocol and unauthorized dissemination of sensitive information. The real reason was that I wouldn't stay quiet. I'm writing this from a small cabin I've rented in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, near the Hiawatha National Forest. I've spent the last 6 months compiling everything I've documented over 5 years. Thousands of photographs, plaster casts, hair samples, DNA analysis reports, GPS data, interview transcripts, historical research. The evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable. But evidence isn't enough. I learned that the hard way. In August, I tried to publish my findings. I contacted cryptozoology journals, wildlife biology publications, even mainstream science magazines. Every single one rejected my work. The responses ranged from polite dismissal to accusations of hoaxing. One editor told me bluntly, "Even if your data is legitimate, we can't publish this. It would destroy our credibility." I tried going public, creating a website, and posting my documentation online. Within a week, the site was taken down for violating terms of service. My social media accounts were suspended for spreading misinformation. The message was clear: certain truths are not allowed to be spoken. So I'm writing this account, this document you're reading now. I don't know how widely it will circulate or how many people will believe it, but it needs to be recorded. Someone needs to know what's really out there in the wilderness. In October, I returned to the Boundary Waters, unofficially and without authorization. I needed to verify something. A theory I'd been developing about the seasonal patterns I'd observed. The Wendigo attacks always occur in deep winter when temperatures drop below zero and food becomes scarce. The creature is driven by starvation, by metabolic desperation. I believe the Wendigo isn't a separate species but rather a condition. What happens to certain individuals, possibly humans, when they're exposed to extreme starvation conditions in the northern wilderness? The transformation is both physical and psychological, a complete corruption of normal human physiology and behavior. I found evidence supporting this theory at an abandoned hunting cabin about 30 miles into the Boundary Waters. The cabin hadn't been used in years, probably decades. Inside, I found human remains, skeletal, scattered across the floor. The bones showed signs of gnaw marks of having been broken open for marrow. And on the wall, scratched into the wood with what appeared to be fingernails, was a message. "So hungry can stop eating, eating, God help me, I'm still hungry." The handwriting started out neat and controlled. By the end, it devolved into barely legible scratches. Carbon dating of the wood scratches suggested they were made over a period of several months, all during one winter approximately 40 years ago. I believe this was patient zero, or at least one of them. A hunter or trapper caught in the wilderness during a brutal winter, unable to escape, slowly starving. And in that desperation, crossing a line, beginning to consume whatever was available, including possibly human remains from a companion who died first. The act of cannibalism, combined with extreme starvation and isolation, triggered some kind of transformation. Physiological changes driven by desperate metabolic need, psychological fracture, the creation of a Wendigo. But the Dogman and Bigfoot are different. These are biological species, creatures that have evolved to fill specific ecological niches in North American forests. The Bigfoot is clearly a large primate, possibly a surviving population of Gigantopithecus or a closely related species. The Dogman is harder to classify, possibly a canid that evolved bipedal locomotion, or something else entirely, a unique evolutionary branch that has no living relatives. Both species have learned to avoid humans, to stay hidden, to exist in the marginal spaces where our civilization doesn't quite reach. But they're there, and as human activity expands further into wilderness areas, encounters are becoming more frequent. The spring convergence I witnessed in Wisconsin isn't unique. I've found historical records of similar events. Areas where multiple cryptid sightings cluster together, where different types of creatures seem to share the same territory. These are ecological edge zones, places where different habitats overlap, creating rich hunting grounds that attract multiple predator species. The creatures compete for resources, establish territories, and occasionally conflict with each other. But they've also developed a kind of hierarchy, an understanding of boundaries. The Bigfoot is dominant, able to drive off both Dogman and Wendigo through sheer size and strength. The Dogman is more aggressive, more territorial, and won't back down from the Bigfoot without a fight. The Wendigo is desperate and opportunistic, taking whatever scraps it can find, attacking when it can, retreating when faced with stronger opponents. And humans? We're in the middle, not quite prey, not quite threat. The creatures avoid us when possible, but when we enter their territories, when we camp in their hunting grounds, when we disturb their convergence points, we become targets. Last week, I hiked into the Hiawatha National Forest, following up on reports of missing hikers. 2 backpackers had disappeared in late October, their camp found abandoned with signs of a struggle. Search and rescue had been called off after a week with no leads. I found their bodies 3 miles from their last known location. The scene was horribly familiar. The campsite torn apart. The bodies partially consumed. Clear signs of predation. The tracks around the site were dogmen, those distinctive canine prints showing bipedal locomotion. But there was something new, something I hadn't seen before. The bodies had been moved after the initial attack, dragged about half a mile to a different location. And at that second location, I found evidence of a second predator, massive footprints, 16 inches long. Bigfoot. The 2 species had shared the kill. This suggested a level of cooperation, or at least tolerance, that I hadn't previously documented. The hierarchy I'd observed was more complex than simple dominance. There was some kind of understanding, some way these creatures coexisted despite competing for the same resources. I documented everything, took my photographs and samples, and hiked out. I filed an anonymous tip with the local sheriff, providing GPS coordinates to the bodies. The families deserved closure, even if they'd never know the truth about what killed their loved ones. This morning I received a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was distorted, electronically altered. The message was brief. Stop investigating. Stop publishing. This is your final warning. I don't know who called. Government agency maybe, or private interests. There are organizations that know the truth, that have been covering up evidence for decades. They have resources far beyond what I can access. They can make people disappear. But I can't stop. Not now. Too many people have died. Too many families have been told lies about how their loved ones were killed. The truth matters even when it's dangerous, even when it's terrifying. So I'm writing this account and I'm distributing it as widely as I can. I'm uploading it to multiple servers, sending copies to journalists and researchers, posting it on every forum and platform that will accept it. They can't silence all of them. The creatures are real. Dogman, Bigfoot, Wendigo, they exist in the forests of North America. They hunt, they kill. They've been here longer than our civilization, and they'll be here long after we're gone. If you hike in the wilderness, be aware. Stay in groups. Don't camp in remote areas alone. Be especially careful in early spring and late fall, when the creatures are most active, when territorial boundaries are being established or defended. And if you see signs, unusual tracks, strange vocalizations, evidence of large predators that don't match known species, report it, document it, but don't investigate alone. Don't become another statistic, another animal attack, another unsolved disappearance. I don't know what will happen to me. The threats are real, and the people making them have already demonstrated their power. But this document exists now. The evidence is recorded. The truth is documented. My name is Ezra. I was a park ranger for 11 years, and I'm telling you, the monsters are real. They're out there in the forests. They're watching from the shadows. They're hunting. And we're not alone in the wilderness. I never believed in monsters, not the kind that lurk in shadows or haunt the edges of civilization. As a park ranger at Blackwood National Forest for 15 years, I'd encountered plenty of natural dangers, aggressive bears, territorial moose, flash floods that appeared from nowhere, but nothing that couldn't be explained by science or animal behavior. At least that's what I thought until last autumn, when everything I understood about our world changed forever. My name is unimportant. What matters is my story. One I've documented meticulously, because I need others to know the truth about what dwells in America's wildest places. The forests hold secrets older than the nation itself. Whispers that echo from a time before European boots ever touched this soil. Blackwood spans over 400,000 acres of dense woodland, rugged mountains, and mist-shrouded valleys in the Pacific Northwest. My station sits on the eastern edge, where the ancient trees give way to rolling foothills. I patrol the boundaries where wilderness meets civilization, that delicate threshold where most incidents occur. Another missing hiker report, Diane sighed, sliding the paperwork across my desk that fateful September morning. The ranger station was quiet, sunlight streaming through dusty windows as autumn painted the forest outside in fiery hues. Third one this month, same area too. I studied the map coordinates. The disappearances clustered around Widow's Peak, a remote area locals had long avoided. Indigenous legends whispered about the region being a thin place where the veil between worlds stretched gossamer thin. I'd dismissed such tales as colorful folklore designed to keep people away from dangerous terrain. Any connection between the missing? I asked, scanning the details. None that's obvious. Different ages, backgrounds. Only commonality is they were all solo hikers who ventured off trail. Rangers know the cardinal rule of wilderness safety: stay on marked paths. Those who wander invite trouble, typically from exposure, injury, or disorientation. But 3 disappearances in the same area within weeks was unusual. I'll check it out, I said, folding the map and tucking it into my jacket pocket. Weather's supposed to hold until tomorrow. I can make it to the northwestern quadrant by nightfall if I leave now. Diane's expression tightened. Be careful. Something about this feels different. If only I'd recognized her intuition for the warning it was. I packed a light sleeping bag, water purifier, first aid supplies, emergency rations, and my standard issue sidearm. Most rangers rarely draw their weapons, using them primarily for signaling or wildlife deterrence. I had never fired mine outside of training. That too would change. The hike began pleasantly enough. September in Blackwood brings crisp air, dappled sunlight through changing leaves, and the earthy perfume of decaying vegetation, that sweet, musty scent marking nature's transition. I moved efficiently, following game trails and ranger shortcuts unknown to casual visitors. By mid-afternoon, the forest began to change. The friendly deciduous groves gave way to old-growth conifers, massive sentinels that blocked the sun, creating a perpetual twilight beneath their canopy. The temperature dropped noticeably. The pleasant forest sounds, birdsong, skittering squirrels, wind through leaves, gradually faded until only my footfalls broke the unnatural silence. I'd visited every corner of Blackwood in my years of service, yet something about this section felt foreign. The trees seemed to crowd closer, their bark blackened and twisted like arthritic fingers. Moss hung in long spectral curtains. The air turned heavy, carrying a metallic tang that coated my tongue. Near dusk, I reached a small clearing about 3 miles from the location of the last disappearance, perfect for setting up camp. As I unpacked my gear, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Rangers develop a sixth sense for wildlife observation. The weight of unseen eyes carries a distinctive feeling. But this was different, more focused, more intelligent. I built a small fire, its orange glow creating a fragile circle of warmth and light against the encroaching darkness. As night fell completely, the forest transformed. Shadows seemed to move independently of their sources. Wind whispered through the trees with almost vocal cadence, rising and falling like conversation just below the threshold of comprehension. In my sleeping bag, I stared upward at stars peeking through the forest canopy. The constellations looked wrong somehow. The familiar patterns slightly altered, as if I were viewing them from a different planet. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of being pursued through endless trees by something I couldn't see but sensed at every turn. A sound woke me near midnight. A cracking branch that my subconscious recognized as too deliberate, too heavy for normal forest wildlife. My hand moved instinctively to the flashlight beside me. The fire had burned to embers, casting only the faintest red glow across the clearing's edge. I scanned the darkness, the beam of light catching nothing but trees and undergrowth. Then, just as I prepared to dismiss it as ordinary forest sounds, my light passed over something that didn't belong. A flash of movement at the tree line. Not furtive like an animal, but deliberate. Something watching, assessing, considering. Hello? I called, immediately regretting drawing attention to myself. Park ranger, identify yourself. Only silence answered, yet the forest itself seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating what would happen next. The light caught it again. Movement between 2 massive pines. A figure unnaturally tall and thin slipped between the trees with impossible grace. It moved like smoke, fluid yet substantial. I caught only a glimpse before it vanished, but it was enough to send ice through my veins. No human moved like that. No animal either. I remained awake until dawn, the fire built high, my sidearm within easy reach. When first light finally broke through the trees, I felt foolish. Darkness plays tricks on the mind. Every experienced ranger knows this. I packed my gear quickly, eager to continue the search for the missing hikers in daylight's rational embrace. But as I shouldered my pack, I noticed something that stopped me cold. Circling my campsite, pressed into the soft forest loam, were footprints. Human in shape but wrong in proportion, too narrow and deep, with elongated toes that dug into the earth like claws. They formed a perfect circle around where I'd slept, as if something had paced the perimeter all night, watching, waiting. I'd seen prints from every creature native to these woods. These belonged to none of them. That was my first indication that the old stories might contain more truth than I'd ever allowed myself to believe. Something hunted in Blackwood Forest. Something the missing hikers had encountered before me. And now it had found me too. The footprints haunted me as I continued toward Widow's Peak. Each step through the increasingly dense forest felt like walking deeper into another world, one where natural laws bent and twisted like the gnarled trees surrounding me. By mid-morning, I reached the coordinates of the most recent disappearance. A 26-year-old wildlife photographer named Marcus Chen had vanished 3 days prior. His last communication had been a text message to his sister. Found something incredible. Going off trail to get closer, we'll send pics. No photos ever arrived. His backpack was discovered by a search party the following day. Camera missing, supplies untouched. The official search had been called off after 48 hours, standard procedure when resources are limited and survival chances diminish. But I wasn't ready to abandon another soul to the forest. Not with what I'd seen last night. I studied the area meticulously, looking for signs others might have missed. Experience had taught me that missing persons cases often hinged on subtle details. A broken twig, disturbed moss, fabric caught on brambles. Hours passed with nothing unusual, until I noticed an odd configuration of stones near a massive fallen cedar. 7 rocks arranged in a rough circle, with an 8th in the center. The formation was too deliberate to be natural, yet didn't match any trail marking system used by rangers or hikers. Curious, I approached and knelt beside the arrangement. The center stone was different from the others. Smooth black basalt that felt unnaturally cold to the touch despite the warm afternoon sun. When I lifted it, my blood froze. Beneath lay a small carved figurine, no larger than my thumb. It depicted a humanoid form with unnaturally elongated limbs and a featureless face save for deeply carved eyes. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each sinew and joint rendered with anatomical precision. But the material, I couldn't identify it. Not wood, not stone, not bone, though it resembled all three. As I examined the figurine, a sound pierced the forest silence, a high keening whistle that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Birds erupted from the canopy in panicked flight. The whistle modulated into something that chilled me more deeply. It began to sound like words, spoken in no language I recognized yet somehow carrying meaning. I pocketed the figurine, a decision I would later question, and headed in the direction of the strange sound. The forest grew darker as I walked, though my watch showed only early afternoon. The trees closed ranks, branches intertwining overhead to block the sky. Mist rose from the ground in twisting columns. After 20 minutes of hiking through increasingly bizarre terrain, I emerged onto the banks of a narrow stream I didn't recognize from any forest survey map. The water ran clear but moved wrong, flowing too slowly, almost viscous like liquid glass. On the opposite bank stood a crude shelter fashioned from branches and animal hides. A campsite, but unlike any I'd seen before. No modern equipment, no synthetic materials, just primitive construction that belonged to a different century. "Hello," I called, hand resting cautiously on my sidearm. "National Park Service." Movement flickered inside the shelter. I waded across the strange stream, uniform pants soaking through with water that felt oddly warm against my skin. As I approached the shelter, overwhelming dread washed over me. That primal fear humans carried before civilization, the instinctive recognition of something wrongly shaped. I drew my weapon. Regulation be damned. "Identify yourself," I commanded, using my authoritative ranger voice that usually commanded respect, even from the most belligerent visitors. A figure emerged from the shelter and my understanding of reality permanently fractured. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, impossibly thin, with limbs jointed in too many places. Its skin was the color of wet ash, stretched taut over a frame that resembled a human's, but with proportions all wrong. The face, I still struggled to describe it coherently. Features that shifted and rearranged themselves as if unable to settle on a final form. Only the eyes remained constant, large, black, and possessing an intelligence that felt ancient and predatory. My weapon raised instinctively, though some part of me recognized bullets might be useless against whatever this was. The creature cocked its head at an impossible angle, regarding me with detached curiosity. Then it spoke, not with its mouth did it even have one, but directly into my mind. "Watcher of woods, protector of boundaries, you seek the lost ones." Not a question, a statement of fact. Its mental voice felt like ice water trickling down my spine. "What are you?" I managed to ask, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I am many names throughout time. Your kind once called us skin dancers, forest walkers, those who wait in shadow. Skinwalker." The term floated up from Navajo legends I'd studied during ranger training, but this didn't match any description I'd read. "Did you take the missing hikers?" I demanded, weapons still raised. The creature's form rippled, features rearranging themselves into something approximating amusement. "Take implies ownership. We do not own. We invite." They accepted. "Where are they?" "Walking other paths. Seeing with new eyes. The boundaries weaken. The old ways return. Soon many will cross." It gestured toward the figurine bulging in my pocket. "You carry my shadow form." A connection established, the invitation extended. Cold realization dawned. The stone arrangement, the figurine, a trap, not for human prey, but for human attention. My attention. The creature took a step forward. I fired a warning shot into the ground between us. The report echoed strangely, muffled as if the air itself absorbed the sound. It paused, those black eyes narrowing. Violence is unnecessary, Watcher of Woods. You will understand soon enough. The changing time approaches, the veil thins. I want to see the missing people, I insisted. Now. They walk the shadow paths willingly, but you... Its gaze intensified, boring into my mind. You are different. A guardian of the threshold. You could be more. The creature extended one impossibly long arm, fingers unfurling like pale spiders. Come, see what they have seen. Every rational instinct screamed to retreat, but something deeper, that primal curiosity that has driven human evolution and exploration, held me in place. If I fled, I might never find the missing hikers. If I stayed... Before I could decide, the forest erupted with sound, crashing undergrowth, voices calling my name. The search party I'd radioed before leaving the station had finally arrived. The creature's form seemed to blur around the edges, dissolving into the forest shadows. Others approach. Our time ends, but I have tasted your mind now. Watcher of Woods, you will seek answers, and when you do, you will find me waiting. It retreated into the shelter, which collapsed inward impossibly, leaving nothing but a scatter of normal-looking branches and leaves. By the time my colleagues burst into the clearing, I stood alone on the bank of an ordinary forest stream, the primitive shelter nowhere to be seen. You okay? Diane asked, reaching me first. You look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost, I thought. Something far older. The figurine in my pocket burned cold against my thigh. A talisman, a warning, an invitation. I said nothing about it, or the creature, to my colleagues. How could I? There was no protocol for encounters with beings that shouldn't exist. As we hiked back to base, I glanced repeatedly over my shoulder, the weight of unseen eyes following our progress through the darkening forest. The missing hikers remained missing. The official report would cite animal attack or exposure as the probable cause. Only I knew different. Only I had met what really hunted in Blackwood's ancient heart. And only I carried a piece of it back to civilization. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those shifting features, those ancient black eyes, examining me with cold curiosity. The figurine sat on my bedside table, impossible to ignore, yet equally impossible to explain. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed information, context for what I'd experienced. If creatures from folklore walked the modern world, there had to be documentation, historical accounts, patterns I could analyze. I called in sick for the first time in 5 years. Diane's voice conveyed skepticism, but she didn't press. You did look pretty rough yesterday, she admitted. Take the time you need. My first stop was the County Historical Society, a quaint building housing archives of local history dating back to the first European settlements. The elderly curator raised an eyebrow at my request for information on local folklore, particularly stories about forest entities. Academic interest, I explained lamely, unwilling to share my true motives. She disappeared into the archives, returning with several dust-covered boxes. Most researchers focus on documented history, she said, but I've always found the stories people tell equally revealing. The materials provided a foundation. Newspaper clippings of unexplained disappearances dating back to the 1880s, journal entries from trappers and hunters describing encounters with shadow people or watchers, and transcriptions of oral histories from local indigenous tribes warning of thin places in the forest where other worlds pressed against our own. Most accounts shared common elements. Encounters in remote areas, particularly around Widow's Peak, strange stone arrangements, the feeling of being observed, and missing persons who were either never found or discovered in inexplicable circumstances, alive but changed, unable or unwilling to explain their experiences. One journal entry from 1923 particularly chilled me. The creature spoke without speaking, offering knowledge beyond human understanding. Thomas accepted and vanished before my eyes, stepping into the air as if through an invisible door. 3 days later, they found him sitting on his own porch, though search parties had checked there repeatedly. He would not speak of where he'd been, but his eyes held something ancient. Within a month, he walked into the forest and was never seen again. The pattern was becoming clear, but I needed more current information. After the Historical Society, I visited the public library, using their computers to search online forums where people shared unexplained experiences. I found hundreds of accounts from across North America describing entities that matched what I'd seen: unnaturally tall, wrong proportions, shifting features, telepathic communication. Most witnesses were dismissed as hoaxers or mentally unstable. Others disappeared shortly after posting their stories. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the broader implications. This wasn't isolated to Blackwood. These entities existed throughout the wilderness areas of North America, perhaps beyond. By afternoon, I'd compiled enough research to fill a notebook with relevant information, but academic knowledge felt insufficient. I needed practical insights from someone who understood the phenomenon firsthand. That led me to Eleanor Wright, a local woman in her 80s who, according to Historical Society records, had been the sole survivor of a famous incident in 1956 when 4 hikers vanished near Widow's Peak. Newspaper accounts described her as confused and delirious when Forest Service personnel found her 3 days after the group was reported missing. I located her address through public records and drove to a modest house on the outskirts of town. The property bordered the forest, separated only by a low stone wall covered in strange symbols I recognized from my research wards, according to Folklore against unwelcome visitors. Eleanor opened the door before I could knock. Tiny and bird-like with sharp eyes that evaluated me thoroughly, she showed no surprise at my uniform. "You've seen them," she stated flatly. "That's why you're here." I nodded, unable to form a denial. "Come in then, but leave that thing on the porch." She pointed to my pocket where the figurine rested. I placed it on the railing, disturbed by the relief I felt once it was no longer touching me. Inside, her home was cluttered with books on folklore, anthropology, and comparative religion. Sketches covered one wall, all depicting variations of the entity I'd encountered, labeled with dates and locations spanning decades. "Sit," she commanded, pouring tea without asking if I wanted any. "You have questions. I have some answers, though probably not the ones you want." "What are they?" I began with the most fundamental query. "Older than us," she replied. "Much older. They were here before humans recognized themselves as separate from nature. Some cultures called them gods, others demons. Some indigenous peoples understood them better as guardians of boundaries between worlds. Are they dangerous?" Her laugh held no humor. "Define dangerous. A mountain lion is dangerous. A storm is dangerous. These beings are different. They operate by rules we barely comprehend. They don't think like us, don't want like us. They've been taking people," I said. "Taking implies force," she countered, echoing the creature's words. "They invite. They offer knowledge, experiences beyond human understanding. Some accept. Like your friends in 1956. Pain flashed across her face. "My husband, my brother, 2 friends. Yes, they accepted." I hesitated. "That's why I'm still here." "What happened to them?" "They stepped through," she said simply. "There are doorways in thin places where our world and theirs overlap. Those who cross can sometimes return, but they're changed. They've seen too much to live comfortably in our limited reality." I described my encounter. Watching her nod in recognition. "You've been marked," she said, gesturing toward the porch where the figurine lay. "A connection established. It will call to you, try to draw you back. How do I stop it?" Her expression turned pitying. "You don't. Not completely. You can resist, set boundaries. The symbols on my wall help, but once they know you, they never fully leave you alone. And the missing hikers? Some may return, changed but alive. Others will remain there, learning what they sought to know. These entities aren't evil by our definition. They simply exist according to different natural laws." "How do you live with it?" I asked. "Knowing what's out there, what happened to your loved ones?" She gazed out the window toward the forest edge. "I maintain the balance. I remember. I warn those who might listen." Her eyes returned to mine, like I'm warning you now. "Don't go looking for them again. They're already watching you more closely than you realize." As if on cue, a shadow passed across the window. Too tall, too thin to be human. Eleanor didn't react, as if such visitations were commonplace. "They're growing bolder," she observed. "The boundaries weaken. Climate change, destruction of ancient forests, human encroachment, all thinning the veil between worlds. What was once rare becomes common." Before leaving, I asked one final question. "Is there any way to help those who've been taken?" Her answer haunts me still. "Help implies they need rescuing. Are you certain they do? Perhaps they found exactly what they were seeking." I left Eleanor's house with more questions than answers, but with something equally valuable, confirmation. I wasn't losing my mind. The phenomenon was real, documented across centuries, consistent in its manifestations. As I retrieved the figurine from the porch, Eleanor called after me. "Remember, Ranger, curiosity is how they hook you. The desire to know, to experience, to transcend ordinary perception. That's the true invitation." Driving home through deepening twilight, I passed the forest edge where shadows gathered like conspirators. For an instant, in my headlights, I glimpsed a familiar tall figure watching from between the trees, black eyes reflecting light like a predator's. The figurine on the passenger seat seemed to pulse with cold energy. I realized I faced a choice that would define everything that followed. Continue investigating, potentially endangering myself, or retreat to the comfortable ignorance of conventional reality. As a park ranger, My duty was to protect visitors from wilderness dangers. But how could I protect them from dangers I barely understood? Sleep eluded me again that night. In dreams that weren't quite dreams, I heard the creature's voice calling me back to the forest. The invitation remained open. The choice was mine. 5 days passed in uneasy limbo. I returned to work patrolling the safer sections of Blackwood, filing reports and pretending my world hadn't fundamentally changed. The figurine remained hidden in my desk drawer, yet I constantly felt its presence, a cold pulse that grew stronger whenever I considered returning to Widow's Peak. Then came the call that forced my hand. Another disappearance, Diane announced, expression grim. But different this time. My stomach tightened. Different how? It's one of ours. Jake Matheson went out on routine patrol yesterday and never checked in. His last radio transmission came from
Widow's Peak.
I finished, already knowing the answer. She nodded. Search party's assembling now. I told them to wait for you. You know that area better than anyone. Jake was 24, a promising ranger who joined our team just 18 months earlier. Enthusiastic, meticulous, with a deep respect for the wilderness. Exactly the kind of person we needed in the service. Also exactly the kind of person who would follow strange sounds or unusual phenomena driven by curiosity and duty. I knew then that avoidance was no longer an option. My knowledge made me responsible. Within an hour, our search team, myself, Diane, and 2 seasonal rangers deployed to Jake's last known coordinates. I brought the figurine, sensing it might prove useful, though I couldn't articulate why. The forest welcomed us with unusual warmth for early October, a heavy, oppressive heat that contradicted the weather report. Mist clung to the ground despite the temperature, swirling around our boots as we hiked deeper into the old-growth section. Something feels off, Diane muttered as we approached Widow's Peak. The animals. She was right. The forest had fallen silent again. No birdsong, no insects buzzing, not even wind through the canopy. Just the sound of our breathing and footfalls on soft earth. We found Jake's backpack at the base of an ancient hemlock, equipment untouched, radio still functional. No signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks leading away, just like the others. We'll establish a search grid, I announced, taking charge. Teams of 2 regular radio check-ins every 15 minutes. Diane, you're with me. As the other rangers moved off to begin their search pattern, I led Diane toward the stream where I'd encountered the entity. Something told me Jake had been drawn to the same location. You know something, Diane said after several minutes of silent hiking. Not a question. I hesitated, weighing professional credibility against the need for truth. I have a theory, I admitted finally, based on previous observations. Cut the bureaucratic language, she countered. We've worked together 15 years. Something happened when you came out here last time. The relief of unburdening myself was tempered by the certainty she wouldn't believe me. Nevertheless, I told her everything. The entity, Eleanor Wright, the historical pattern of disappearances. To my surprise, Diane didn't dismiss my account. Her expression remained thoughtful, calculating. My grandmother was Blackfoot, she said after I finished. She had stories about thin places, entities that could move between worlds. A pause. I always thought they were just stories. They're not, I said simply. We reached the stream as afternoon light filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows across the water. It looked ordinary today, no viscous flow, no unnatural qualities. Yet the atmosphere remained charged, expectant. There, Diane pointed to the opposite bank. Footprints. Regulation issue ranger boots, Jake's size. They led toward a dense thicket of rhododendron and disappeared. As we crossed the stream, the figurine in my pocket grew painfully cold. I removed it, surprised to find it vibrating slightly against my palm. What is that? Diane asked, eyeing it warily. A connection, I replied, remembering Eleanor's words. And maybe our way to find Jake. The figurine seemed to pull toward the thicket like a compass needle seeking north. Following its guidance, we pushed through the dense vegetation into a clearing that shouldn't have existed. A perfect circle of bare earth surrounded by impossibly tall trees that I didn't recognize from any botanical catalog. In the center stood Jake Matheson, alive but changed. He stood unnaturally still, head tilted at a painful angle, eyes fixed on something invisible in the middle distance. Beside him waited the entity, its form even more disturbing in daylight, features constantly rearranging themselves like smoke given temporary solidity. Jake, Diane called, stepping forward. He didn't respond, didn't even blink. The entity, however, turned its attention toward us. The Watcher of Woods returns. Its voice filled my head, and brings another. The circle widens. Let him go, I demanded, drawing my sidearm despite knowing its probable uselessness. He does not wish to leave, the entity replied. He learns, he sees beyond the veil as many have before. What are you showing him? I asked, inching closer. Realities, possibilities, truths your kind once knew but forgot in your rush to separate from nature. Diane had drawn her weapon too, though her hand shook slightly. Can you hear it? She whispered. I nodded. It communicates telepathically. The entity gestured toward Jake with one elongated limb. He stands at the threshold, not yet committed to crossing. You may still call him back if he chooses to listen. Jake, I shouted. Ranger Matheson, you need to come back with us. His eyes remained unfocused, but something flickered across his expression, recognition, conflict. The entity addressed me again. You carry my shadow form. The invitation remains open to you as well. Do you not wish to understand, to see beyond human limitations? The figurine pulsed warmly now, almost seductively. I could feel its pull, the temptation to know, to experience what lay beyond ordinary perception. For a moment I glimpsed what Jake must be seeing. Realities layered upon realities, time flowing in multiple directions simultaneously, consciousness extending beyond individual boundaries into a vast, interconnected web. No, I said firmly, though part of me wavered. I'm here for Jake, that's all. Duty over curiosity. Admirable if limited. The entity's form rippled with what might have been amusement. What will you offer in exchange for this one's return? What do you want? I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. Recognition. Remembrance. Your kind once acknowledged us, respected the boundaries. Now you forget, dismiss, rationalize. The old compacts weaken. Understanding dawns slowly. These entities weren't predators in the conventional sense. They were guardians of something older than human civilization, forces of nature personified. They didn't seek worship or sacrifice, but acknowledgement of their reality. If I promise to remember to respect the boundaries, will you release him? The entity considered, its form shifting more rapidly. Words are insufficient. A token is required. An exchange. I understood immediately. The figurine for Jake. Yes, return my shadow form and this one may choose to follow you back. How do I know you'll keep your word? I demanded. Concepts of deception are human constructs. We simply are what we are. We do what is in our nature. It wasn't much of a guarantee, but I had few alternatives. I placed the figurine on the ground between us. Instantly it began to change, the material softening, flowing, until it resembled a small pool of midnight that absorbed into the earth. The entity inclined its head in what might have been satisfaction. The compact is made. Call to him now. If his connection to your reality remains strong enough, he will hear. Jake, I said, keeping my voice calm and authoritative, it's time to come home. Your family is waiting. Your fellow rangers need you. For several agonizing moments, nothing happened. Jake remained frozen, caught between worlds. Then slowly, his eyes focused, awareness returning like dawn breaking. Chief, he whispered, voice rusty from disuse. What? Where am I? You're in the forest, I replied, relief flooding through me. You've been missing for 24 hours. He looked disoriented, gaze darting between us and the entity beside him. It showed me things, so many things. I know, I said gently, but it's time to come back now. Jake took one faltering step toward us, then another. The entity made no move to stop him, watching with those unfathomable black eyes. As Jake reached us, Diane grabbed his arm, anchoring him to human contact. We've got you, she assured him. I addressed the entity one final time. Our bargain is complete. We'll leave your territory now. The boundary is re-established, Watcher of Woods. But thinning continues. Others will come, others will cross. I'll remember, I promised. And I'll warn those who will listen. The entity's form began to dissolve into the forest shadows. Until the next thinning time then, we will be watching, always watching. As we led Jake from the clearing, supporting his unsteady steps, I felt something fundamental shift within the forest. Not a physical change, but an alteration in the underlying reality. The trees seemed to exhale, tension dispersing. Birdsong gradually returned. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. Jake would require careful monitoring. His experience had changed him, that much was evident from his distant gaze and fragmented speech. But he was alive and he was coming home. Diane caught my eye over Jake's bowed head. This isn't over, is it? No, I admitted. I think it's just beginning. The sun was setting as we rejoined the other search team members, bathing Blackwood forest in golden light that rendered even the darkest shadows temporarily benign. But as I glanced back toward Widow's Peak, I knew the ancient watchers remained patient, eternal, existing alongside our world while occupying a reality I could barely comprehend. I had fulfilled my duty as a ranger today, but I had also accepted a new responsibility to remember, to witness, to maintain the delicate balance between worlds that grew increasingly fragile with each passing year. 3 months passed. Winter descended on Blackwood Forest, transforming the landscape with snow and ice. Jake Matheson took extended medical leave, spending time with family while receiving therapy for what official reports labeled trauma-induced dissociative episodes. Only a handful of us knew the truth. I continued my regular duties but with heightened awareness of the forest's deeper mysteries. Small things caught my attention now, stone arrangements left by unknown hands, whispers in the wind that almost formed words, shadows that moved independently of their sources. The entities remained mostly hidden, but I sensed their presence constantly, especially near the boundaries of Widow's Peak. Eleanor Wright became an unexpected mentor. Weekly visits to her home provided context for my experiences and practical knowledge about maintaining boundaries without severing connections entirely. "You've become a guardian," she told me during one snowy evening, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, not just of the forest, but of the threshold between worlds. "I never asked for that responsibility," I countered.
"Few who serve as intermediaries do," she replied. "The role finds those suited to it."
December brought administrative changes that complicated my situation. Budget cuts forced Blackwood to reduce winter patrols, particularly in remote areas deemed low visitation risk during cold months. Widow's Peak fell into this category despite my carefully worded objections. "We can't justify resource allocation based on folklore," my supervisor stated firmly after rejecting my patrol schedule recommendations. "Focus on areas with documented safety concerns." I could hardly explain that the documented safety concerns were being systematically misclassified. Missing persons continued to be attributed to exposure, animal attacks, or hikers simply becoming lost, rational explanations that maintained the comfortable fiction of a world without mysteries. 2 weeks before Christmas, heavy snowfall isolated the eastern section of the park. Most staff took holiday leave, leaving a skeleton crew to handle emergencies. I volunteered for the Christmas Eve shift, knowing the forest would be empty of visitors, and allowing others to spend time with family. The ranger station felt cavernous and still as evening approached. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, accumulating rapidly. I brewed coffee, completed paperwork, and waited for my shift to end with no expectation of incident. The radio crackled to life at 11:17 p.m. "Help anyone. Coordinates." The transmission broke apart, static overwhelming the words before cutting out completely. I tried to re-establish contact, following standard protocol. No response. The brief transmission contained too little information to determine location or nature of emergency. Under normal circumstances, I would deploy search and rescue immediately, but something felt wrong. Christmas Eve, in a blizzard with trails closed and warnings posted throughout the park, no ordinary visitor would be out there. And the voice, there was something familiar about it, something that resonated with memories of that day at Widow's Peak. I cross-referenced the partial transmission with our communications system. The signal had originated from the northwestern quadrant, Widow's Peak, exactly where I'd expected. Protocol dictated calling for backup before investigating a distress call in dangerous conditions. But backup would take hours to assemble in the storm, and something told me this wasn't an ordinary emergency. This was a message meant specifically for me. I geared up for winter conditions: thermal layers, emergency supplies, heavy-duty flashlight, GPS, and sidearm. As I prepared to leave, I hesitated before the supply cabinet, then retrieved an item I'd started carrying on all patrols, a small pouch containing symbols Eleanor had taught me, protection against unwanted influence, carved into stone tokens. The drive to the nearest accessible trailhead took 40 minutes through near whiteout conditions. Hiking to Widow's Peak would normally require several hours, but with deep snow and limited visibility, I estimated double that time. If someone truly needed rescue, they might not survive that long in these temperatures. Yet something told me this wasn't about a human emergency at all. The forest in winter storm presented an entirely different set of dangers: hypothermia, disorientation, snow-laden branches crashing down, wildlife driven to desperation by hunger. I moved carefully, following landmarks I'd memorized rather than snow-covered trails. 2 hours into the hike, the storm abruptly ceased. Snow hung suspended in the air as if time itself had paused. The silence was absolute. Not even the crunch of snow beneath my boots made sound. The forest had entered that unnatural state I now recognized as a boundary thinning. I continued forward, no longer needing my flashlight. The snow glowed with its own pale luminescence, casting the forest in monochromatic blue light. My breath formed no vapor despite the cold. Reality was altering around me, rules changing subtly with each step toward Widow's Peak. The frozen stream appeared exactly where I expected, though its surface now resembled polished obsidian rather than ice. Across it stood the entity, or perhaps a different one, identical in its otherworldliness, watching my approach with familiar black eyes. "Watcher of Woods." Its voice filled my mind. "You answered the calling. Was that you on the radio?" I asked, stopping at the stream's edge. We use what methods reach you. The threshold weakens tonight, when your world celebrates ancient rituals of light amid darkness. I recognized the reference to Christmas Eve, winter solstice, and similar celebrations marking the year's darkest time, periods when, according to folklore, boundaries between worlds grew most permeable. Why call me here, I demanded. What's happening? The entity's form rippled, features rearranging into a configuration that somehow conveyed urgency. Others come, others without understanding. They tear at boundaries with intent, not accident. Other humans, you mean? Seekers of power. They learn fragments of old ways but lack respect for balance. They breach what should not be breached. Cold understanding dawned. Someone's trying to force a crossing to your world. Force unnatural passages. Draw entities not meant for your reality. The consequences spread beyond both our kinds. I hadn't considered that these boundary entities might themselves be maintaining order, preventing more dangerous forces from entering our world. The revelation shifted my perspective on their role. Where? I asked. Where are they doing this? The ancient circle, the place of standing stones. You know it. I did. A formation of megalithic rocks deep in Blackwood's heart, officially classified as indigenous ceremonial grounds dating back centuries. Archaeologists had documented the site but found little to explain its purpose or significance. What do you need from me? The question felt strange. Offering assistance to an entity I barely understood, whose nature remained fundamentally alien. Human rituals require human intervention. We cannot directly stop what they begin. And if I help, balance returns. Boundaries stabilize. The compact between our kinds renews. I considered my options. Refusing meant potentially allowing unknown dangers to enter our world. Helping meant acknowledging these entities as legitimate guardians of natural order, a profound philosophical shift from seeing them as threats or anomalies. I'll need to see what they're doing first, I said cautiously. I won't commit to interference without understanding the situation. Acceptable. Follow. The entity moved along the frozen stream, its form sometimes solid, sometimes dissolving into mist before reforming. I followed at a distance, alert for any sign of deception or threat. We traveled what should have been miles in minutes, space compressing around us as we moved through the forest. The standing stones appeared suddenly, a circle of 12 megalithic slabs surrounding a central altar stone, all dusted with fresh snow except the altar itself, which remained mysteriously bare. Around the circle stood 4 figures in dark clothing, hoods obscuring their faces. They had cleared the snow within the stone circle and marked the ground with symbols I recognized from my research: invocation glyphs, boundary-breaking sigils, doorway markers. A 5th figure lay on the altar stone, apparently unconscious. They require 5 crossings to create a permanent breach, the entity explained. 4 willing, 1 sacrifice. Horror rose within me. They're going to kill that person. Death bridges realms when properly channeled. They know ancient methods forgotten by most of your kind. I drew my sidearm, though I had no clear shot from this distance. I need to stop them now. Caution, Watcher of Woods. The ritual has begun. Interruption without proper countermeasures risks greater damage. What countermeasures? Tell me quickly. The entity gestured toward my pocket. The symbols you carry. Place 1 at each cardinal direction outside their circle. Then disrupt their center focus. I retrieved Eleanor's stone tokens, each carved with protective symbols. The entities couldn't directly interfere, but they could guide human actions to maintain natural order. I was being used as their instrument, but for purposes that aligned with my own duty to protect. Moving silently through the snow, I circled wide around the ritual site. The hooded figures chanted in a language I didn't recognize, their voices creating discordant harmonies that hurt my ears. The air above the altar stone had begun to shimmer and darken, forming what appeared to be a growing rent in reality itself. I placed the first token at the northernmost point outside their circle, burying it in snow. Immediately I felt the forest respond, a subtle shift in pressure, a momentary clarification of sound. The chanting faltered briefly before resuming. Working my way clockwise, I positioned the remaining tokens at east, south, and west points. With each placement, the unnatural tier above the altar seemed to stabilize, no longer growing though still present. The central focus, what did the entity mean? The unconscious person on the altar stone, I realized. They were channeling the ritual through a human conduit. I had seconds to act before the hooded figures noticed the change in their ritual's progression. Drawing my sidearm, I shouted with all the authoritative force I could muster. National Park Service, step away from the altar immediately. The figures turned in unified shock, chanting interrupted. I fired a single shot into the air, the report echoing strangely through the altered atmosphere. 2 of the hooded individuals fled immediately into the forest. Another reached inside their robe, possibly for a weapon. I aimed directly at them. Don't, I warned. Hands where I can see them. The fourth figure, apparently the leader, turned toward the tier in reality. It's too late. The door opens. They were right. Despite the interruption and the protective tokens, the tier had begun to widen again. Something moved within it, a darkness deeper than absence of light, a presence that radiated malevolence, unlike anything I'd encountered before. The unconscious victim on the altar stone began to convulse, back arching impossibly as dark energy poured into them from the widening rent. I made a split-second decision and rushed forward, tackling the leader away from the altar. We crashed to the ground as the remaining hooded figure fled into the darkness. "You fool," the leader hissed, face revealed as that of a middle-aged man with wild eyes. "Do you know what power we could command? What knowledge could be ours?" "I know you're willing to murder for it," I snarled, securing his wrists with zip ties from my gear. "That tells me everything I need to know about your intentions." With the leader restrained, I turned my attention to the victim and the still widening tier. The entity materialized beside me, its form more distinct than I'd ever seen it, features almost solidified into something resembling ancient indigenous depictions of forest spirits. The breach must be sealed. The channeling body removed. I lifted the unconscious victim, a young woman, barely 20, from the altar stone. Immediately the tier's expansion halted, its edges fluctuating uncertainly. "Not enough," the entity communicated urgently. "The opening requires closing ritual. Tell me what to do," I demanded, feeling reality itself becoming increasingly unstable around us. "Place your hands upon the altar. Allow me temporary connection through your consciousness." Everything in my training and experience warned against such vulnerability. Yet the alternative seemed far worse, allowing whatever darkness gathered beyond that tier to enter our world. I gently placed the young woman in the snow beside my restrained prisoner, then approached the altar stone. It hummed with energy, vibrating at a frequency that made my teeth ache and vision blur. "Will I remain me?" I asked, hands hovering above the stone. "You will be changed by knowing, as all are, but yourself remains your own." Taking a deep breath, I pressed my palms against the cold, smooth surface of the altar. The entity moved behind me, its form enveloping mine like mist. For a terrifying moment I felt my consciousness expanding beyond physical boundaries, perception stretching to encompass multiple overlapping realities simultaneously. Through the entity's awareness I glimpsed what lay beyond the tier. Ancient forces neither good nor evil but utterly alien to human understanding. Entities that existed in dimensions where physical laws operated differently. My voice spoke words I didn't understand, language flowing through me rather than from me. My hands traced symbols on the altar stone that disappeared into its surface like ripples in water. The tier began to contract, edges pulling inward despite resistance from whatever waited beyond. The process felt simultaneously instantaneous and eternal. When it finally completed, the tier sealed with an audible snap that echoed through the forest. Normal reality crashed back into place. Snow falling again, wind resuming its mournful howl through bare branches, sensory input limited once more to ordinary human perception. I staggered away from the altar, physically and mentally exhausted. The entity stood opposite me, its form already beginning to fade. The balance returns. The boundary strengthens. "You have chosen your role, Watcher of Woods." "Did I have a choice?" I asked, still reeling from the experience. "All have choice. You chose protection over power. Knowledge with respect rather than domination. The old way." The entity gestured toward my prisoners, the cult leader and the unconscious victim. "These require your human justice now. Our concerns end where yours begin." "Will they try again? Others like them?" "Always. The lure of transcendence calls to your kind as strongly as it ever did. Some seek it with wisdom, others with greed. The boundary requires guardians on both sides." I understood then that my role had fundamentally changed. No longer just a park ranger protecting wilderness from human impact, but a guardian of boundaries between realities, a role humans had played for millennia through shamans, mystics, and those sensitive to the world's deeper mysteries. "I'll need help," I admitted.
Knowledge. Training.
"The old woman guides you well. Others exist. You will find them as needed." The entity began dissolving into the snowy air, its parting thought lingering in my mind. "Until next thinning time, Guardian. Watch the boundaries. Remember the compact. We do the same." I was left alone in the ancient stone circle with my two human concerns, a criminal to bring to justice and a victim to return to safety. Ordinary ranger duties, though the context had expanded beyond anything my training had prepared me for. By dawn I had hiked back to my vehicle with both individuals, the young woman now conscious but disoriented, the cult leader sullenly silent. I reported finding them performing dangerous rituals in the park after responding to an emergency call. The official report mentioned nothing of entities, reality tiers, or boundary guardianship. Some truths remain unwritten, passed only to those prepared to understand them. In the months that followed, I continued my ranger duties with renewed purpose. Eleanor Wright began introducing me to others who served as boundary keepers in various capacities, a network of ordinary people with extraordinary awareness, scattered throughout the country in places where the veil between worlds grew thin. Jake Matheson eventually returned to service, changed but functioning. We never discussed his experience directly, but sometimes I would catch him staring into the forest with knowing eyes, listening to voices others couldn't hear. The entities remain present in Blackwood's deepest reaches. I sense them watching whenever I patrol near Widow's Peak, not with malice but with ancient patient awareness. We have an understanding now, mutual recognition of roles in maintaining natural order that extends beyond conventional human knowledge. Sometimes on quiet nights, when the forest speaks in whispers and shadows move with purpose, I remember that glimpse beyond ordinary reality, the vast interconnected web of consciousness that spans dimensions and binds all living things. The experience changed me, as the entity predicted, not in any obvious way visible to colleagues or friends, but in my fundamental understanding of humanity's place in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than most ever realize. I remain a watcher of woods, a guardian of boundaries, a keeper of secrets older than human civilization, one among many who stand at the threshold between worlds, maintaining the delicate balance that allows both to coexist. And when visitors ask if I believe in ghosts or monsters while gathering around campfires, I smile and tell them the forest contains mysteries worth respecting. Some understand the deeper meaning, others dismiss it as ranger superstition. Both responses serve the balance in their way. After all, some are meant to know, others are not. The forest keeps its secrets, and so do I. The thing they don't tell you about wilderness is how it breathes, how the forest inhales your presence and holds it, examining you like a foreign object before deciding whether to accept or reject you. After 5 years as a ranger at Shadow Ridge National Forest, I'd learned to recognize that sensation, the weight of being watched by something ancient and indifferent. My station sat on the northwestern boundary, 30 miles from the nearest town and accessible only by a single gravel road that became impassable after heavy rains. The isolation suited me. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, the quiet of the forest was a balm I desperately needed. Sierra Station, this is dispatch. Do you copy? The radio crackled, breaking the morning stillness of my small command center. Sierra Station. Copy. Go ahead. Dispatch. I set down my coffee, already knowing what was coming. We've got hikers missing from Trailhead 16. Family of 3, expected check-in was yesterday at 1800 hours. Last known position was heading toward Blackwater Ridge. I glanced at my topographic map. Blackwater Ridge was notoriously treacherous. Steep ravines, dense undergrowth, and frequent fog banks that could disorient even experienced hikers. But it was also where we'd been finding the tracks. Copy that. I'll gear up and head out. Any details on the family? Parents in their 40s, daughter is 12. They have overnight gear but limited wilderness experience. Understood. I'll radio when I reach Trailhead 16. As I prepared my pack, I thought about the unusual incident reports that had been crossing my desk for the past 3 months. Campers reporting strange vocalizations at night, not wolf or coyote, but something that seemed to mimic human speech patterns. Hikers finding their equipment disturbed while they slept. And the track's huge, humanoid prints that our wildlife biologists reluctantly admitted didn't match any known species. The senior rangers avoided talking about it. Rangers who stayed too long at Shadow Ridge developed a kind of selective blindness to certain phenomena. It was easier that way. I checked my rifle, a standard-issue Remington 700, before securing it in my vehicle. Standard protocol discouraged rangers from carrying firearms during routine operations, but Shadow Ridge wasn't standard. We had mountain lions, bears, and occasionally armed poachers. The rifle was officially for them. Unofficially, I'd been sleeping with it next to my bed since finding those massive tracks leading directly to my cabin's windows one morning last month. The drive to Trailhead 16 took 40 minutes along service roads that wound through increasingly dense forest. The canopy above grew thicker until only occasional shafts of sunlight penetrated. I'd read once that ancient humans feared forests because they couldn't see the sky, couldn't orient themselves or spot approaching danger. Evolution had hardwired that unease into us. At the trailhead, I found the family's vehicle, a blue Subaru Outback with Colorado plates. I radioed in the license plate to confirm it matched our missing hikers, then began examining the area for signs of their departure point. The trail register showed they'd signed in 2 days ago, planning a 2-night trip to Blackwater Ridge and back. Standard route, nothing ambitious. I noted their planned camping locations and began following their trail. 4 hours later, deep in the back country, I found their first campsite. The tent was still erected, but something was wrong. The rainfly had been torn in long parallel rips that reminded me of claw marks, and their equipment was scattered as if they'd left in a hurry. As I knelt to examine a strange impression in the soil, something moved at the edge of my peripheral vision, just a shadow shifting against shadows. But in that moment, I felt the forest's breath catch. Something was watching me. Something that knew these woods far better than I ever would. I stood slowly, hand drifting toward my sidearm. "Hello?" I called. "Forest Service. Anyone there?" Only silence answered. But as I turned to continue tracking the family, I could have sworn I heard something large moving through the undergrowth, paralleling my path but keeping just out of sight. Night was falling, and I had a missing family to find. But with each step deeper into Shadow Ridge's wilderness, I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being hunted. The second day of the search brought rain, a persistent penetrating drizzle that reduced visibility and muffled sound. Perfect conditions for getting lost, terrible conditions for finding the lost. I'd spent the night in my emergency tent near the family's abandoned campsite, repeatedly trying to raise anyone on my radio. Around 2 a.m., I jolted awake to the sound of wood knocking against wood, 3 distinct taps, followed by a pause, then 3 more. It came from different directions, as if multiple sources were communicating. "Just branches in the wind," I told myself, knowing there wasn't enough wind to move branches. At dawn, I found their trail again. 3 sets of footprints moving at a hurried pace away from their camp. Not following the established trail but heading straight into the densest part of the forest. The parents' prints showed they were running. The child's showed she was being carried, then set down, then carried again. They were fleeing something. By midday, I'd followed their chaotic path to a stream crossing. Here they'd made a critical error, crossing at a point where the current was strongest. Their tracks emerged on the other side, but now there were only 2 sets. The mother's prints disappeared. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, Sierra Ranger."
I've found signs of a water crossing accident, requesting additional search teams and swift water recovery resources. The radio returned only static. These deep ravines created dead zones for communication.
I needed to push forward. The father and daughter might still be alive. As I prepared to cross at a safer point upstream, I noticed something on a fallen log. A strip of fabric caught on the bark. I recognized it immediately from the family's photos, as part of the daughter's distinctive red jacket. But what made my blood run cold was how the fabric had been deliberately tied to the log, not torn or accidentally snagged. Someone had left it as a marker. My instincts screamed for caution, but my duty demanded I continue. I crossed the stream and followed the remaining tracks until they disappeared entirely on a rocky outcropping. Standing there, scanning the terrain through my binoculars, I spotted something unexpected about half a mile distant. Nestled in a small clearing, stood a cabin I didn't recognize. It wasn't on any of my maps, and I prided myself on knowing every structure in my sector. Shadow Ridge had been extensively surveyed, especially after the National Forest designation in the 1950s. Any private inholdings were documented. This cabin looked old, possibly predating the park itself, with a steeply pitched roof now sagging in the middle and walls of darkened logs. No smoke rose from its stone chimney, but something about it suggested occupancy. I approached cautiously, rifle now in hand. "Hello, Forest Service. Anyone there?" No response. The cabin door hung partially open. Inside, dust covered most surfaces, but fresh footprints marked the floor, small ones like a child's. "Hello, I'm here to help. Forest Ranger." My voice sounded thin in the empty space. The interior was sparse. A table, 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and a single bed frame without a mattress. On the table sat a book, its leather cover cracked with age. I moved closer and read its handwritten title, "The Watchers of Shadow Ridge, a True Account." Beside it lay a child's drawing, crude but unmistakable. It showed tall figures with long arms standing among trees, watching a family. In the corner, fresh pencil marks spelled out, "They took Mom." A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun, raising my rifle, but saw only the open door, moved by a draft. When I turned back to the table, a folded piece of paper had appeared beside the book that I swore hadn't been there before. The note contained just 3 words in adult handwriting: "They're always watching." The radio at my hip suddenly burst to life, making me jump. Through the static, I could barely make out "Dispatch. Sierra Ranger, lost contact. Backup teams, evacuate immediately." Multiple reports of the transmission died. Outside, the forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of rain on leaves. Just the pounding of my own heart, and in the distance, the rhythmic knocking I'd heard the night before. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Closer now. I reached for the book, intending to take it with me, but stopped when I saw fresh mud tracked across the floor, massive bare footprints that hadn't been there when I entered. They led from the back wall to directly behind where I now stood. I didn't turn around. Some primal instinct told me that would be a fatal mistake. Instead, I kept my eyes fixed forward and slowly back toward the door, feeling the temperature drop as I passed through something's shadow. I ran. There's no professional way to phrase it. 20 years of wilderness experience, military training, and ranger protocols abandoned in an instant of pure animal terror. I ran until my lungs burned, putting as much distance between myself and that cabin as possible. 2 miles later, I collapsed against a tree, finally able to process what had happened. Those footprints, easily 18 inches long and deeply impressed, hadn't been there when I entered. Something had silently approached me from behind, standing close enough that I felt its shadow fall over me. The logical part of my brain suggested a transient, perhaps someone living off the grid. But transients don't move silently across creaking floorboards. They don't leave footprints that resemble a giant bare human foot. I checked my pack. In my panic, I'd grabbed the book from the table. The Watchers of Shadow Ridge, a true account. Its leather cover was cracked and stained, the pages yellowed with age. The author's name had been deliberately scratched out. My radio crackled. Sierra Ranger, this is Search Team Bravo. Do you copy? Finally, reception. Copy Bravo. This is Sierra Ranger. We've recovered a female hiker from the river, approximately 2 miles downstream from your last reported position, alive but hypothermic and disoriented. No sign of the other 2 missing hikers. They'd found the mother. Copy that. Any coherent statement from the survivor? A pause. Negative. She's not making much sense. Keeps talking about tall ones in the trees. I'm continuing the search for the father and daughter, I replied, not mentioning the cabin. Without physical evidence, my experience would sound like wilderness-induced paranoia. Be advised, weather's deteriorating. Command is considering suspending the search until morning. Understood. I'll continue until dusk. I needed to find the remaining hikers before nightfall, not just for their safety but for my own peace of mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in that cabin was now tracking me. With no clear trail to follow, I decided to retreat to my outpost cabin, a small ranger shelter stocked with emergency supplies about 3 miles northwest. From there, I could organize a more systematic search at first light. As I hiked, I flipped through the mysterious book. It appeared to be a journal dating from 1924, written by a timber surveyor named Thomas Blackwood. His account described being assigned to map the remote valleys of what would later become Shadow Ridge National Forest. One passage made me stop walking. March 18, 1924. For 3 nights now, we have heard the knocking sounds. 3 distinct knocks, followed by silence, then repeated. The men attribute it to woodpeckers or falling branches, but I know better. Something is communicating. Today I found tracks unlike anything I've seen, like a man's foot, but massive, and with unusual distribution of weight. When I showed the others, they laughed, suggesting a bear walking on hind legs. But bears don't walk 8 miles on hind legs, nor do they arrange broken saplings in patterns that resemble written language. The native guides refuse to enter the northern valley, calling it the place of watchers. They speak of tall beings that have existed since before the mountains rose, guardians of boundaries between worlds. They believe these creatures don't harm those who respect their territory, but anyone who intrudes too deeply is never seen again. I dismissed such tales as superstition until yesterday, when I observed through my field glasses what appeared to be an extremely tall, hair-covered figure standing perfectly still among distant trees, watching our camp. When I alerted my companions, it stepped behind a trunk and seemed to vanish despite its massive size. The final entry was dated 2 weeks later, April 2, 1924. They've taken Phillips and Rogers. The knocking surrounded our camp last night, dozens of sources perfectly synchronized. By morning, 2 tents were empty with drag marks leading into the forest. The remaining men are fleeing today. I alone will stay. They've been watching me specifically. I sense they're curious rather than hostile. I've left signs I wish to communicate. I understand now why the natives leave offerings at the boundaries, not out of superstition, but acknowledgement. These forests have never belonged to us. We are tolerated guests, nothing more. Something approaches my tent now, larger than I imagined possible. I hear breathing unlike any creature known to. The entry ended mid-sentence. The remaining pages were blank except for the final page, which contained a crude map with a single location marked, the exact coordinates of the cabin I'd just fled. As darkness fell, I reached my outpost cabin and secured the door. I built a fire in the small stove and placed the journal on the table, trying to make sense of its contents. The similarities to current events were too precise to be coincidence. 100 years ago, Thomas Blackwood had encountered something in these forests, the same something that had taken the missing father and daughter, the same something that had stood behind me in that abandoned cabin. Outside, the forest fell unnaturally silent. Then came the sound, 3 distinct knocks on the cabin wall. Pause. 3 more knocks from the opposite wall. They had found me. Dawn arrived after the longest night of my career. The knocking had continued intermittently until about 3 a.m., coming from different points around the cabin, sometimes so close that the walls vibrated, sometimes distant enough to suggest multiple sources communicating with each other. I'd maintained a vigil by the window, rifle ready, watching shadows move among the trees. Twice I'd seen something massive shift position, a darkness deeper than the surrounding night. At least 8 feet tall with unnaturally long limbs. It never approached directly, just maintained a perimeter, watching. With the first light I radioed my position, deliberately vague about the night's events. Search operations would resume for the missing father and daughter, but I now carried a horrible suspicion about their fate. Before leaving the cabin, I studied Blackwood's journal again. His final entries suggested the Watchers weren't necessarily hostile unless their territory was violated. But what constituted a violation? The missing family had been on established trails before something scared them off course. I packed light, water, emergency rations, first aid kit, the journal, and my weapons. Standard procedure dictated I rejoin the main search parties, but my instincts pulled me back toward that mysterious cabin. The child's drawing haunted me. They took Mom, yet the mother had been found alive in the river. Either the child was mistaken, or something more complex was happening. The forest felt different in daylight, less menacing but somehow more alert, as if countless eyes tracked my movement through the trees. I maintained a deliberate pace, frequently stopping to listen and observe. The strange silence persisted. No birds, no small animals, as if the normal inhabitants had evacuated. Midday found me approaching the cabin from a different angle than before. I crouched in dense undergrowth, observing from a distance. Nothing appeared changed, but fresh tracks surrounded the structure. The same massive bare footprints I'd seen inside, now numerous enough to suggest multiple individuals had circled the building repeatedly. As I watched, movement caught my eye. A small figure darted from behind the cabin to a cluster of boulders 30 yards away, a child, the missing girl. I almost called out but stopped myself. She wasn't running in panic but moving purposefully, stopping to check her surroundings with surprising calm. She carried something clutched to her chest, a book similar to Blackwood's journal. I needed to reach her without alerting whatever else was watching these woods. I circled wide using terrain features for cover and approached the boulders from the opposite side. "Hey there," I said softly, showing my ranger badge as I came into view. "I'm here to help you." The girl didn't seem surprised or relieved. She regarded me with solemn eyes that had seen too much. "Are they making you say that?" she asked. "What? No. I'm a park ranger. We've been searching for you. Your mom is safe. We found her yesterday." "That's not my mom," she said flatly. "They took her. The one you found is something else." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean? Who took your mom?" "The people of the trees. They've been here forever. Dad tried to fight them when they came to our tent. That was a mistake." Her voice was eerily matter-of-fact. "They don't like violence in their forest. Where is your dad now?" She pointed toward the deep woods behind us. "Learning. They're teaching him their ways. He can't leave anymore." "And you? Are you okay? Have they hurt you?" She shook her head. "They're curious about me. They've never taken a child before. The old ones think I can learn to speak their language." She held up the book she carried. Another journal, newer than Blackwood's. "There have been others who stayed, who learned." "Listen," I said, trying to sound calm while adrenaline coursed through me. "I need to get you back to safety. Your real mom is worried sick." "The one you found isn't my mom," she repeated. "Look closely when you see her again. She looks the same, but she's not. They can do that, make copies that help them understand us." A twig snapped in the forest behind her. A deliberate sound. The girl turned. "They're coming back. You should go now. They don't want anyone else." Her eyes met mine. "They've been watching you for months. The one who lives in your cabin sector. It stands outside your window at night." My blood ran cold. The footprints I'd found leading to my windows. "How do you know that?" "They showed me. They remember everyone who enters their territory." She looked over my shoulder and her eyes widened. "Too late. Don't move. Don't show fear." I felt it before I heard it, a presence behind me. Massive and ancient. The air temperature dropped noticeably. Slowly I turned. It stood 15 feet away, partially concealed by a massive pine trunk, but there was no mistaking its size, at least 9 feet tall, with a broad chest and powerful limbs covered in reddish-brown hair. Its face remained in shadow, but I glimpsed intelligent eyes regarding me with unmistakable calculation. Not an animal. Something else entirely. The girl spoke, but not to me. A series of clicking sounds and low vocalizations unlike any language I'd heard. The creature responded with similar sounds. "He says you've been respectful of the forest," she translated. "That's why you're still alive." The others who came before you shot at them, set traps. I found my voice. I need to take you back. Your mother, your real mother, needs you. The creature made a rumbling sound deep in its chest. He says I can go if I choose, the girl said. But what's waiting isn't what you think. The woman in the hospital isn't my mother. The creature stepped partially into a shaft of sunlight, and I saw its face clearly for the first time, a disturbing blend of ape-like features and almost human expression, with deep-set eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. It regarded me without aggression, but with clear warning. Look at the journal, the girl said, holding out Blackwood's book. Read what happened to those who stayed. Some became like them, some became something else entirely. The creature extended one massive hand toward the girl, not grabbing but offering. She took a step toward it. I had seconds to decide. Draw my weapon and likely die, or let this child walk away with a creature science claimed didn't exist. Wait, I said. At least tell me your name, so I can tell your mother, your real mother, what happened. The girl paused. Emily Winters. She looked at me with eyes too old for her 12 years. But that's not who I am anymore. She placed her small hand in the creature's massive palm. Together they turned and walked into the shadows of the ancient forest, leaving me alone with nothing but questions and the terrible knowledge that the wilderness held secrets far darker than I'd ever imagined. The search for Emily Winters and her father officially ended 3 days later. The official report cited treacherous terrain, a flash flood, and the statistical improbability of survival after 96 hours in wilderness conditions. What it didn't mention was my encounter or the creature I'd seen escorting a young girl deeper into Shadow Ridge's uncharted valleys. I'd reported finding an abandoned cabin and signs of the girl, but omitted the details that would have ended my career. Even so, my supervisor regarded me with suspicion when I turned in my field notes. "You're sure that's everything, Jensen?" he asked, studying my face. "Yes, sir. Everything relevant to the search operation." He nodded slowly. "You know, in my 30 years here, I've had 6 rangers request transfers after working the northern boundary. 3 others simply walked off the job without explanation. I'm fine, sir. Just disappointed we couldn't find them." "The mother's recovering well," he said, watching my reaction. "Strange case, though. Hospital says her blood work shows unusual markers, and she has no memory of anything after setting up camp that first night." Emily's words echoed in my mind. "That's not my mom. The one you found is something else." "Trauma can cause memory loss," I offered. "True, but trauma doesn't usually change blood type." He closed my report folder. "Get some rest, Jensen. You look like you've seen a ghost." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my cabin's porch, rifle across my lap, staring into the darkness beyond my small circle of lantern light. Blackwood's journal lay open beside me, its yellowed pages containing accounts of other encounters dating back a century, stories of hikers found wandering with no memory, of hunters who fired at shadows and were later discovered with their skulls crushed, of children who vanished only to be glimpsed years later, running with something not quite human through remote valleys. Around midnight, my satellite phone rang. The one reserved for emergency communications. The display showed the hospital's number. "Ranger Jensen speaking." A nurse's voice, tense with controlled panic. "The Winters woman is gone. I don't know how to explain this. She was in her bed during evening rounds. In the morning we found what looked like a husk, like a shed skin in her exact shape, but hollow, like she molted." I wasn't surprised. "Was anything else unusual?" A pause. "The night security footage shows her walking out normally at 2 a.m. Except when she passed under the emergency lights, she cast no shadow." After disconnecting, I sat motionless, processing this confirmation of what Emily had tried to tell me. The creature in the woods hadn't taken her mother. It had replaced her with something that could pass for human. A perfect copy that fooled everyone except her daughter. Why? To study us? To infiltrate? Or something more complex that my human mind couldn't comprehend? The knocking began again as the moon rose, 3 distinct sounds from the forest's edge. I rose, walked to the boundary of my cleared property, and stood facing the darkness. "I know you're there," I called. "I know what you did with the Winters family." Silence answered, but I sensed movement. Something massive shifting position just beyond my vision. Why her? Why them? There are hundreds of hikers. What made them special? The darkness seemed to congeal into a darker shape, massive and upright. I raised my rifle out of instinct but kept it lowered. A deep vocalization emanated from the woods, not speech but not animal sound either. A communication attempt. "I can't understand you," I said. Moonlight reflected briefly from eyes watching me from at least 8 feet above the ground. Then, with deliberate slowness, a massive hand extended from the shadows and placed something on the ground at the forest's edge, a small, worn book. The shape retreated. I approached cautiously and retrieved the offering, a journal newer than Blackwood's but written in the same careful hand. The inscription read, "For the next watcher." I opened to a random page. May 15, 1973. I've been in their company for 3 months now. What began as my abduction has become my education. They are not one species but many, variations that evolved in isolated valleys across millennia. Some remain primitive, but the elder tribes possess intelligence that rivals or exceeds our own. They've existed alongside humanity since before recorded history, retreating deeper into shrinking wilderness with each passing century. They permit our presence because they must, but they maintain boundaries through fear and selective culling. The forest rangers are of particular interest to them. They see the rangers as fellow sentinels, territory guardians worthy of study. They've been watching Ranger Campbell for months, debating whether to initiate contact or eliminate him as they did his predecessor. My predecessor had disappeared while investigating reports of unusual tracks 2 years before I took this posting. His body was never found. I looked up from the journal to find the creature had returned, standing at the forest's edge. In the moonlight I could see it clearly, 9 feet tall, broad-shouldered, covered in reddish-brown hair except for its face, which showed disturbingly human-like features despite its massive brow and wide jaw. It raised one hand in what might have been greeting or warning, then deliberately turned and walked into the forest, pausing once to look back, as if inviting me to follow. I stood frozen at the boundary between my world and theirs, understanding flowing through me with terrible clarity. I wasn't being hunted, I was being recruited. 6 months have passed since my encounter with the creature Emily Winters called the People of the Trees. 6 months of sleepless nights, of jumping at shadows, of questioning my sanity while knowing with absolute certainty what I witnessed. I've read both journals dozens of times, comparing Blackwood's century-old accounts with the more recent observations from the 1970s. The similarities are too precise to dismiss, the details too consistent to be fabrication or folklore. The Winters case was officially closed. The father and daughter are listed as presumed deceased. The mother's disappearance from the hospital attributed to post-traumatic confusion, a distraught woman wandering away, likely to have taken her own life though her body was never recovered.
I know different. I know Emily still moves through the deep valleys with her new family. I know what returned from the forest wearing her mother's shape was something ancient learning to pass among us. And I suspect her father has joined the small number of humans who over centuries have crossed the boundary between our world and theirs.
3 weeks after my encounter, I was promoted to senior ranger for the northern sector following my supervisor's unexpected retirement. His parting words to me were strange. The forest chooses its guardians, Jensen. Always has. Watch for the signs. That night I found a small carving on my porch, a human figure standing beside a much taller one, both facing the same direction. A message even I could interpret. The knocking still comes at night. 3 distinct sounds, now seemingly directed at me personally rather than as territorial warnings. Sometimes I hear movement on my roof or glimpse massive shadows passing just beyond my windows, not threatening, observing, evaluating. Last week, I found fresh tracks leading to my door, not circling as a predator would, but approaching directly, then returning to the forest. An invitation. The truth I've come to accept is both terrifying and fascinating. Shadow Ridge isn't just wilderness, it's a boundary between known and unknown, between the world of humanity and something far older. The creatures, I no longer think of them as animals or monsters, are its guardians, and they've been assessing me just as they assessed rangers before me. Some they frightened away. Others they eliminated. A rare few they invited to understand. What happened to the Winters family wasn't random. They were chosen because they entered a part of the forest the creatures consider sacred. The mother was studied and replaced. The father was taken for longer observation. The daughter, showing unusual acceptance rather than fear, was offered a choice. Now I face my own choice. Last night I found a crude map pushed under my door, similar to the one in Blackwood's journal, but more detailed, showing valleys and cave systems not on any official survey. A large X marked a location deep in the uncharted Northern Territory, with a date inscribed below. Tomorrow's. I've packed my gear with care, not my ranger equipment but tools for understanding, cameras, audio recorders, journals, and supplies for an extended journey. No weapons. They would be useless anyway against what waits in the deep forest, and I sense weapons would be interpreted as rejection of their offer. What am I being offered? Knowledge, certainly. Communion with something beyond human experience. Perhaps transformation, if the journals are to be believed. Those who stayed longest began to change, enhanced senses, altered perception, physical adaptations to forest life. As I write these final notes, I'm aware they may be found someday by another ranger assigned to investigate my disappearance. To you, my successor, I leave this account and this warning. The wilderness you patrol is not empty, not unclaimed. We have never been alone in these forests. The creatures you glimpse at the edge of firelight, the sounds you dismiss as wind or wildlife, The sensation of being watched by ancient eyes, all are real. They've been here since before humans walked upright, and they'll remain long after our cities crumble. They don't hate us, they don't love us. They simply are, and they permit our presence as long as certain boundaries are respected. Tomorrow I cross one of those boundaries. By choice, not coercion. I go to learn what they wish to teach, to see what few humans have seen. To understand what Shadow Ridge truly is, not just a wilderness but a doorway to something beyond our narrow conception of reality. The knocking has started again outside. 3 distinct sounds, now matched by 3 more from another direction. They're gathering, waiting for my answer. I'm no longer afraid. Something in me recognizes them, as if awakening to a truth long buried in human DNA, a memory of when we shared the world with other intelligent species before we claimed dominance and relegated them to myth. In the morning I'll follow their map into the deep valleys where no trails exist. I'll meet them on their terms, in their territory. What happens after, I cannot say. If I don't return, don't search too hard. Don't cross the boundaries they've established. Remember that the forest chooses its guardians, and sometimes those guardians are not what they once were. The wilderness breathes, it watches, and occasionally it invites you to understand its secrets if you're brave enough to listen. End of recovered document from Ranger Michael Jensen's cabin. Found 3 weeks after his disappearance from Shadow Ridge National Forest. Search operations suspended after 5 days due to unusual weather conditions and equipment failures. Case remains open. The radio crackled with static before a voice broke through. Outpost 8, do you copy? We've got 3 hikers missing near Thunder Basin. Last contact was 18 hours ago. Ranger Sam Blackwater pressed the transmit button, his breath forming a cloud in the frigid mountain air. Copy that, base. I'm heading out now. It was the 3rd disappearance this month in Yellowstone, and it didn't sit right with Sam. 20 years as a park ranger had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now every nerve in his body was on high alert. He grabbed his pack, checking his supplies methodically. First aid kit, emergency rations, satellite phone, and the old leather journal his Shoshone grandfather had given him years ago. The journal was filled with stories, warnings, really, about things that lived in the deep wilderness. Things that most rangers dismissed as superstition. Sam knew better. The thermometer outside his cabin read -15. An unusual cold snap had gripped the northern sector of Yellowstone for weeks, driving wildlife into strange patterns. Wolves had abandoned their usual territories, elk herds had migrated weeks ahead of schedule, and the silence that was the most unsettling part. The forest had gone quiet. As he trudged through knee-deep snow toward Thunder Basin, Sam couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It began as a prickling sensation between his shoulder blades, then grew into a certainty that eyes were tracking his every move from within the dense pines. At the last known coordinates of the missing hikers, he found a campsite in disarray. A tent had been torn open from the inside, sleeping bags still inside, but ripped to shreds. The fire pit held only cold ashes, and 3 sets of footprints led away from the camp in different directions. But it was the 4th set of tracks that made Sam's blood run cold. They weren't human, too large, with an elongated arch and what appeared to be claws at the toes, and they seemed to have appeared from nowhere, materializing in the center of the camp before following each set of human tracks in turn. Sam knelt to examine them more closely, his gloved finger tracing the outline of one print. It matched exactly the sketches in his grandfather's journal, the mark of the Wendigo. Dr. Maya Chen adjusted her new ranger hat in the rearview mirror before stepping out into the biting cold. After 5 years studying wildlife biology in the comfort of university laboratories, the reality of Yellowstone in winter was a shock to her system. Dr. Chen, welcome to the North Entrance Station. A burly man with a salt and pepper beard extended his hand. I'm Chief Ranger Wilson. Glad you made it safely. This storm's been wreaking havoc on the roads. Thanks for meeting me, Maya said, shaking his hand firmly. I've been following the unusual wildlife patterns you've been documenting. The mass migrations, predator behavior changes. It's fascinating from a research perspective. Wilson's expression darkened. Fascinating isn't the word I'd use. We've got 3 missing hikers and 2 rangers who haven't checked in. One of them, Sam Blackwater, is our most experienced backcountry guide. I read the briefs, Maya nodded. The working theory is that the extreme weather is causing wildlife to behave aggressively. That's the official line, Wilson said, glancing over his shoulder before continuing in a lower voice. But there's something else, something that doesn't match any known predator pattern in the park. Back at headquarters, Wilson introduced Maya to the search and rescue team assembled in the briefing room. Maps of the northern sector were spread across tables, red pins marking last known locations of the missing persons. Dr. Chen will be joining Ranger Delgado tomorrow to investigate the unusual animal tracks we've found near each disappearance, Wilson announced. A young ranger with intense eyes and a serious expression nodded at Maya. "I'm Elena Delgado. I hope you brought proper winter gear. Where we're going, exposure can kill you in hours." "I came prepared," Maya assured her, though the look Delgado gave her city-bought gear suggested otherwise. After the briefing, Maya unpacked in her temporary quarters, hanging up her PhD diploma almost as an afterthought. 5 years studying predator behavior patterns, and nothing in her research had prepared her for what Wilson had shown her: photographs of tracks that defied classification, tissue samples with unexplainable properties, and audio recordings that made the hairs on her neck stand up. One image in particular haunted her: a thermal camera capture of a figure at the tree line. Too tall and thin to be human, with an oddly shaped head that appeared to have antlers or branches extending from it. The temperature reading where it stood registered 20 degrees colder than the surrounding forest. Sam Blackwater had managed to find shelter in an abandoned fire watcher's cabin as darkness fell. The temperature had dropped to -30, and the wind carved through the mountains like a knife. He barricaded the door with furniture and built a small fire in the wood stove, then spread the contents of his pack on the dusty table. By firelight, he opened his grandfather's journal to the pages about the Wendigo. Born of winter and hunger, the spidery handwriting read, "The Wendigo is not a creature of flesh alone, but of spirit. It embodies starvation and the desperate acts it drives humans to commit. Once a person has tasted human flesh in the deep winter, the transformation begins." Accompanying the text were intricate drawings: a gaunt, skeletal figure with elongated limbs and an antlered head. Notes in the margins detailed encounters dating back to the 1800s. One passage caught Sam's attention. "The Wendigo cannot be killed by conventional means, for it is hunger incarnate. But it can be bound, trapped between worlds with the proper ceremony and sacrifice." A map was sketched on the adjacent page, showing what appeared to be Yellowstone's northern region, with an X marked at what Sam recognized as obsidian cliffs. The final line on the page sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the winter cold. "The binding weakens when the winter is longest and darkest, when hunger walks among men again." As if responding to his thoughts, a sound cut through the howling wind outside. A wailing cry that was neither human nor animal, but something caught between worlds. It started low, then rose to a pitch that made the windows vibrate. Sam doused his fire immediately and crouched in darkness, rifle ready. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of something large moving around the cabin, testing the walls and windows. Then came a voice, eerily human. "Sam." It dragged his name out in a parody of human speech. "We're so hungry, Sam." It was his cousin's voice, Mark Blackwater, who had disappeared in these mountains 15 years ago. Maya's first day in the field with Elena Delgado was a brutal introduction to Yellowstone's backcountry. They had been hiking for 6 hours through deep snow, following a grid pattern around the last known location of Sam Blackwater. "The track stop here," Elena said, kneeling beside a set of impressions in the snow. Then they just... Maya examined the area carefully. No signs of animal predation, no blood, no struggle. She pointed to the strange elongated tracks that seemed to follow Sam's. "And these other prints, they're consistent with the photos Wilson showed me." "You know what some of the old-timers are saying?" Elena's voice dropped. "They think it's a Wendigo." Maya raised an eyebrow. "A mythological creature? Myth to some, reality to others." Elena stood, scanning the tree line. "Sam Blackwater comes from a Shoshone family that's been in these mountains for generations. His grandfather was known for tracking things most rangers pretend don't exist." "I'm a scientist," Maya reminded her. "I deal in observable phenomena." Elena's laugh was short and without humor. "Spend enough time in these mountains, Doctor, and you'll find the line between observable and impossible gets real thin." As if to punctuate her point, a sound echoed through the valley, a high, keening wail that made both women freeze in place. It wasn't a wolf or any animal Maya could identify.
"What the hell was that?"
Maya whispered. Elena unholstered her sidearm. "That's the sound 3 separate search teams reported hearing before communication was lost." As darkness approached, they sought shelter in a ranger outpost, a small, well-stocked cabin used during summer months. Elena secured the perimeter while Maya set up their communications equipment. "Base, this is Ranger Delgado and Dr. Chen. We've reached Outpost 5 and will continue the search at first light. No sign of Ranger Blackwater, but we've identified similar track patterns to the previous disappearances. Over." The radio returned only static. "The storm must be interfering," Elena said, though her expression suggested she didn't believe it. She pulled a worn book from her pack and handed it to Maya. "You might want to read this tonight. It's a collection of incident reports dating back to the park's founding. Cases that were never officially explained." Maya flipped through pages of meticulous documentation, photographs, sketches, and written accounts of rangers and visitors describing encounters with something that hunted in the deep winter. "Elena," Maya said slowly, Some of these accounts go back over 100 years, but they're describing the same phenomenon. Now you're getting it. Elena nodded. Whatever's out there, it's been here a lot longer than us. That night, as wind battered the small cabin, Maya was awakened by a scratching at the windows. Elena was already up, her silhouette visible against the dim light of the wood stove, shotgun ready. It's testing the cabin, Elena whispered, looking for a way in. Outside, something moved across the porch. Through the frosted window, Maya caught a glimpse of a figure impossibly tall and thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its head brushed the top of the doorframe, and what looked like antlers scraped against the wood. Then it spoke, in a voice cracked and dry as dead leaves. So hungry. Please, help us. While Maya and Elena were tracking him in the backcountry, Sam Blackwater had managed to make his way to a place few people knew existed. Deep in the Yellowstone wilderness, accessible only by a series of hidden game trails, stood a small cabin that didn't appear on any park maps. The elderly woman who opened the door had expected him. "I've been waiting for you, Samuel." Martha Running Wolf had been the park's unofficial historian for 40 years, documenting the stories most officials dismissed. "It's back, isn't it?" Sam asked as she ushered him inside. Martha nodded gravely. "The signs are all there. The coldest winter in a century. Animals fleeing their territories, and now people vanishing." The interior of the cabin was lined with bookshelves containing journals, photographs, and artifacts collected over decades. Martha led Sam to a table where an ancient map was spread out, weighted down with stones at each corner. "The Wendigo is bound to this land," she explained, her finger tracing a circle around the northern sector of the park. "Every 40 years, when the winter is harshest, the binding weakens. It begins to hunt again. My grandfather's journal mentioned a binding ceremony at Obsidian Cliffs. Yes. In 1894, after a particularly deadly winter, 7 medicine men from different tribes came together to bind the spirit. Before that, it was 1854, during another brutal winter when an entire expedition disappeared. Only one man survived to tell what happened, how hunger drove them to the unthinkable." Sam studied the map intently. "The binding is weakening now." "It's already broken," Martha corrected him. "What you're tracking is just the beginning. The Wendigo has awakened, but it's still weak. It needs to feed to regain its full strength. How do we stop it?" Martha pulled an ancient leather pouch from a locked chest. "The ceremony must be performed again at the winter solstice 3 days from now. But it requires someone connected to this land by blood, someone who understands what we're facing." She fixed Sam with a penetrating gaze. "It was supposed to be your grandfather before he passed. Now that responsibility falls to you." "I don't know the old ways like he did," Sam protested. "But you have his journal, and you have me." Martha handed him the leather pouch. "Inside are the sacred items needed for the binding. But there's something else you need to know. Samuel, the binding requires a sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" "The Wendigo is a spirit of hunger and consumption. To bind it, you must offer something of equal power, a piece of yourself. Your grandfather lost his right hand in the previous binding." Sam absorbed this information silently, feeling the weight of generations settling on his shoulders. "There's one more thing," Martha said, pulling out a faded photograph. "The Wendigo doesn't just take people. It becomes them, using their voices and memories to lure others. Trust no one in these mountains, Samuel. Not until this is over." Chief Ranger Wilson had organized the largest search party in Yellowstone's recent history. 20 experienced rangers were combing the northern sector, coordinated from a mobile command center established at Mammoth Hot Springs. Still no contact with Delgado and Dr. Chen, a communications officer reported. They missed their scheduled check-in 3 hours ago. Wilson rubbed his tired eyes. 6 people missing now, including his most experienced ranger and a renowned wildlife biologist. The official story, the one he'd given to the press, was that extreme weather conditions had stranded the search teams. The truth was far worse. His satellite phone buzzed. "Wilson here. Sir, it's Ranger Cooper at the north entrance. We've got a situation. One of the missing hikers just walked out of the forest." "Which one?" Wilson asked, already heading for his vehicle. "James Mercer, sir. But there's something wrong with him. Medics are treating him for exposure, but he's not right." 30 minutes later, Wilson stood outside the medical center, watching through the window as doctors examined the survivor. James Mercer was severely emaciated, his skin stretched tight over his bones, his eyes sunken and wild. He hadn't spoken since emerging from the forest, and he refused all food. "His core temperature is still dangerously low," the doctor reported. "We can't seem to warm him up, and there's something else. His skeletal structure shows evidence of recent deformation. The X-rays show elongation in his limbs and digits that's, well, it's physiologically impossible." "Is he contagious?" Wilson asked, remembering the passages from the old journals Martha Running Wolf had shown him years ago. We don't know what we're dealing with, the doctor admitted. We've instituted quarantine protocols as a precaution. That night, a nurse making rounds found James Mercer's room empty, the restraints torn apart. The window was open, the frame splintered outward, as if something had burst through it. On the floor lay the shredded remains of his hospital gown, and a trail of strange elongated footprints led from the window into the surrounding forest. By morning, 3 staff members from the medical center had disappeared. Maya and Elena had spent a terrifying night in the outpost cabin, listening to the creatures circle their shelter, speaking in the voices of people they knew. By dawn, it had vanished, leaving behind only those strange tracks in the fresh snow. We need to reach base camp, Elena insisted, checking her weapon. Whatever's happening, we can't face it alone. Maya was poring over the collection of incident reports. Elena, look at this. She pointed to a map where previous disappearances had been marked over the decades. They form a pattern, concentric circles around Obsidian Cliffs, and they all occur in 40-year cycles. So what's at Obsidian Cliffs? According to these notes, it's a place of power. Several Native American tribes considered it sacred ground. Their radio suddenly crackled to life. Elena? Maya? Can you hear me? It was Sam Blackwater's voice. Elena grabbed the handset. Sam, where are you? We've been searching for days. I'm at Obsidian Cliffs. I know what we're dealing with and how to stop it, but I need help. The binding ceremony requires at least 3 participants. The binding? Maya questioned. I'll explain everything when you get here. But you need to hurry. The solstice is tomorrow and that's our only chance. Elena looked at Maya. It could be a trap. That thing was imitating voices last night. But if it's really Sam, and he knows how to stop this, Maya let the implication hang in the air. They gathered their equipment and set out toward Obsidian Cliffs, following the map and the incident reports. The journey was treacherous, steep terrain covered in ice and snow with temperatures hovering around -20. As they approached the cliffs, the forest grew eerily silent. No birds, no wind, just the sound of their own labored breathing and the crunch of snow beneath their boots. There, Elena pointed to a column of smoke rising from a clearing ahead. In the shadow of the towering obsidian formation, they found Sam Blackwater tending a small fire. His face was gaunt, his eyes deeply shadowed, but he greeted them with obvious relief. "Thank God you made it," he said, quickly ushering them into a crude shelter constructed of branches and tarp. Inside, the walls were covered with symbols drawn in what looked like red ochre. "What is all this?" Maya asked, examining the markings. "Protection," Sam explained. "The Wendigo can't cross these wards." He pulled out his grandfather's journal and Martha's leather pouch. "I have everything we need for the binding ceremony, but it has to be performed at midnight on the solstice when the night is longest and the Wendigo is at the height of its power." "Sam, I'm a scientist," Maya began, but he cut her off. "And I was a skeptic too, until I saw what this thing can do. It's not just killing people, Dr. Chen. It's transforming them. The hikers, the missing rangers, it's turning them into extensions of itself." Elena had been unusually quiet, standing near the entrance to the shelter. "How do we know you're really Sam Blackwater?" she asked suddenly, her hand resting on her sidearm. Sam met her gaze steadily. "You don't. That's the nature of the Wendigo. It sows doubt, but I can prove it." He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a distinctive scar on his forearm. "I got this saving your brother from that grizzly 3 summers ago, Elena. The Wendigo can take my voice, but it can't replicate memories." Elena relaxed slightly. "What's the plan?" Sam spread the ancient map on the ground. "The binding requires 3 elements: blood from someone connected to this land, fire from a sacred source, and a personal sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Maya asked. "Something meaningful, something painful to give up." Sam's expression was grim. "For me it's this." He held up his right hand. "The same sacrifice my grandfather made 40 years ago." Maya and Elena exchanged horrified glances. "There has to be another way," Maya insisted. "There isn't," Sam replied. "But your sacrifices can be different. The binding draws power from what matters most to each participant." As night fell, they prepared for the ceremony. Sam explained their roles. Elena would maintain the sacred fire, Maya would recite the binding words from his grandfather's journal, and Sam would make the final offering. At midnight, as they stood at the center of a circle of symbols drawn in the snow, the temperature plummeted. The stars seemed to dim, and a darkness deeper than night settled over the clearing. "It's coming," Sam whispered. From the surrounding forest emerged not one figure but many, emaciated, elongated forms with antlered heads, moving with unnatural speed and grace. Among them, Maya recognized faces, the missing hikers, rangers she'd seen in photographs. "Don't listen to anything they say," Sam warned. "They'll try to break the circle." The creatures began to call out in the voices of loved ones, pleading for help. Maya's concentration wavered when she heard her father's voice, dead 3 years now, calling her name. Stay focused, Sam shouted over the cacophony of voices. Elena fed cedar and sage into the fire, which burned with an intense blue flame. Maya began reciting the words from the journal, strange syllables that felt ancient on her tongue. As the binding progressed, the creatures grew frenzied, rushing at the circle, only to be repelled by the invisible barrier created by the symbols. Sam stood at the center, knife in hand, his expression resolved. In the final moment as Maya spoke the last words of the binding, Sam brought the knife down, but instead of severing his hand, he plunged the blade into his own heart. "Samuel," Elena screamed. "It's the only way," he gasped, blood staining the snow beneath him. "A life freely given binds it for another 40 years. As Sam collapsed, a blinding light erupted from the circle. The creatures shrieked in unified agony, their forms contorting and elongating further until they seemed to fold in on themselves, disappearing into the night. In the sudden silence that followed, Maya and Elena rushed to Sam's side, but it was too late. He had given the ultimate sacrifice. 1 year later, Maya Chen stood at the newly erected memorial for Sam Blackwater and the other victims of what official reports called the worst winter disaster in Yellowstone's history. The official story cited extreme weather conditions and wildlife attacks for the deaths and disappearances. Only a handful of people knew the truth. "Dr. Chen," a familiar voice called. Elena Delgado approached, now wearing the badge of Chief Ranger following Wilson's retirement. "Glad you could make it for the ceremony. I wouldn't miss it," Maya replied. After the events at Obsidian Cliffs, she had abandoned her university position to accept a permanent role as Yellowstone's head wildlife biologist. "How are the new warning systems working?" "So far so good. We've got monitoring stations set up around the northern sector, tracking temperature anomalies and wildlife patterns." Elena lowered her voice. "And Martha Running Wolf has trained 7 of us in the old ways, just in case." They stood in silence for a moment, honoring the sacrifice that had saved countless lives. 40 years, Maya said finally. "That's how long the binding will hold?" Elena nodded. "We'll be ready when the time comes. That's why we're here, to remember, to watch, and to protect." As they turned to leave, Maya cast one final glance at the memorial stone. Carved into its base, visible only to those who knew to look for it, was a small symbol, the same one Sam had drawn in the snow on that fateful night. A reminder that some threats never truly vanish, they only sleep. And in the deepest wilderness of Yellowstone, where few humans ever venture, the land remembers. The ancient spirits wait, and winter always returns.